Greetings, everyone. I'm Shadow Watch. Thank you for tuning in. I hope this video helps you drift off to sleep. Before we continue, please like the video so I can keep creating more content like this.
Story number 1. Screw HIPAA. If I don't talk about this patient, I'm gonna lose my mind. I know how to make people talk. It's a pretty helpful skill. It's even saved my life a few times. But every once in a great while, it gets me into massive trouble. The first time it got me in trouble was in elementary school. It started with one of those guessing games with which frazzled teachers tend to end the day. It's called Truth or Lie, Mrs. Waters told us. I could tell just looking at her that she was making this up off the top of her head, practically pulling words out of thin air. Words that would grab our attention, words that would focus us, words that would make us do what she needed us to do. We go around the circle, and we each tell one truth and one lie. The person across from you has to guess which one is the truth and which is the lie. If the guesser gets it wrong, they go back to their desk. If they get it right, they stay in the circle and we move on to the next person. Who wants to start? I was insufferable then, and I am insufferable now, so I shot my hand into the air. I want to go first. Mrs. Waters, pick me. Pick me. She almost rolled her eyes, which was no surprise. I had that effect on people back then. Okay, Rochelle, tell us a truth and tell us a lie. No, I said. I want to be the first to guess. Mrs. Waters really did roll her eyes this time. All righty, Sarah. She turned to the girl sitting straight across from me. Tell us a truth and a lie. I don't remember what Sarah's truth was, and I certainly don't remember her lie. But I remember how she pouted when I correctly guessed which was which. The class had gone halfway around the circle by the time we had our first elimination. Ben Markham, who burst into tears on his way back to his desk. The circle shuffled closer to fill in his spot, and we continued. When it was my turn again, I guessed correctly. And again on my third turn, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth. But my wins were quickly growing stale, and I was getting bored. The problem was, these truths and lies were so stupid. Worse, they were silly. Megan Knight's truth was she had a cat named Corky, and her lie was she had a giant snail who ate cars. Scotty Spitzer wasn't any better. His truth was he had a little brother named Tucker, and his lie was that Stone Cold Steve Austin was his big brother. But when he made that claim, specifically, when he gleefully spouted the word, Big Brother, I noticed that the girl across from me shifted weirdly. She turned in on herself, like a flower blooming in reverse. I locked in on her, suppressing a smile. Selena, tell me a truth and tell me a lie. I have a new puppy named George, and an uncle who lives on the moon, she giggled. Those are dumb, Selena, I complained. Her smile froze. Come on. I focused on her, noting the way she twitched, how her left ankle kept rolling in and out. Tell me something that's actually interesting. I can speak Spanish, but my mom doesn't like me to. Your mom being stupid isn't interesting, Selena. Following an instinct I didn't understand but never denied, I kept my voice gentle. Tell a truth that's important. Stop, Mrs. Waters said sharply. Right now. I ignored her. Tell us a truth about your brother, Selena. Selena immediately said, I found my brother hanging in the garage. He had no shoes. His feet were purple and his tongue was too big for his mouth. I was in kindergarten when she finished lamely. Then her eyes went wide and white as the oversized bone buttons on Mrs. Waters' sweater, and she burst into tears. I will spare you the fallout of that particular incident and move on to more important things. As I grew older, I got better at making people talk. Better at finding words that grabbed attention, words that focused my targets, words that made them do what I wanted them to do. When I turned 21, I decided I wanted to be a cop. I was really good at it. So good I promoted 3 times in 5 years. I was a sergeant by age 26. I was on the verge of promoting to lieutenant when private industry came calling. A law office, specifically. The attorney paid me well, but not as well as the lawyer who came knocking after him, who ended up not paying as well as the one who came knocking after her. When you get really good in the public sector, the private sector comes after you. When you get really, really good in the private sector, the government comes calling. And the government isn't always good at being told no. Officially, I worked for Human Resources as an interviewer. Unofficially, I was an internal affairs investigator on steroids. You would not believe the things I learned, or the catastrophes I helped avert. That all went up in flames a few months ago. During a very unconventional interview, the situation went off the rails in spectacular fashion, and my subject told me things I wasn't supposed to know. Once again, I'll spare you the details of the fallout. Let's just say that by the end of it, I was in almost incomprehensibly big trouble. As a result, I was terrified. When you're that scared, you'll do anything you're told. Sure enough, I was given a choice. Die, or do exactly as I was told. I was told I would continue to work as an investigative interviewer for a multi-agency task force with the unassuming, weirdly charming name of the Agency of Helping Hands. I was told I would work under the supervision of an exceptionally brilliant and highly specialized psychiatrist. I was told that if I played my cards right, I'd be able to earn my own degree while working for this doctor. I knew it was too good to be true. I knew it in my very core. But I also knew I didn't have a choice. So I took the job. I learned that the Agency of Helping Hands runs a prison. Officially, it's called the North American Specialized Containment Unit, or NASCU. But everyone here just calls it the North American Pantheon. That's where I work now. My job is to interview the inmates. Some of these inmates are horrifying. Some are monsters. Many have never spoken a word to anyone. The rest gibber and taunt and terrorize, but they don't ever say anything. They don't really talk. And for a lot of reasons I cannot begin to explain right now, it is vitally important that they start talking. That's why the agency needed me. It's the only reason I'm alive, because I can make them talk. The agency started me with the easiest inmate in the facility, I guess to make sure I can really do what they need me to. They had me do a full forensic workup, the kind of thing I used to do for law offices. Personal history, physical report, mental condition, circumstances, and a transcript of the interview with my insights. I cannot describe this job. I really can't. This facility, these inmates, even the other staff, I don't know. I don't know what to do. I'm so scared. I freak out every time I think too hard. Panic attacks and night terrors have become my steadfast companions these past few months. But I guess that's what happens when your understanding of the world has been inverted, and when that inversion has been burned to the ground. What happens when you live in a state of fear. So, rather than try and probably fail to explain it all, what I have to do, what I have to deal with, what will happen if I don't, I'm going to just share that first report on that first prisoner. He goes by Numa. For what it's worth, I was told that Numa is the least dangerous inmate in the Pantheon. Numa, classification string, non-cooperative / indestructible / Gaian / constant / moderate / terrace. On November 12, 1928, authorities received a distress call from a remote logging village deep in the Canadian Rockies. There is no extant proof of the village's existence. Given the circumstances, the Agency of Helping Hands undertook extensive effort to ensure removal of all traces of the village and its inhabitants from the historical record. A recording of the transmission exists in agency archives. The recording is 17 seconds long. Translated, it says this: "It came down from the mountain. It came for us. It's here." What follows is a low, unsettlingly sing-song roar, a sound without parallel. A sound that evolved to send the deepest, most primal core of the human mind into a panic. This panic does not recognize that a century has passed, or that thousands of miles now lay between it and the place that sound was made. Extreme weather and difficult terrain precluded timely assistance. All the authorities could hope for was to clean up the mess, whatever it was, as soon as they could. When they finally set foot in the village, they found death. Blood stained every inch of the village, coloring the snow and the ice beneath. Limbs, hair, viscera, and flesh were strewn across the paths. Wild animals and domesticated dogs alike were feeding on the carnage. The initial hypothesis was that a pack of starving wolves had set upon the village, or perhaps that an unusually large bear woken prematurely from hibernation. Given the extent of the damage, some officials even postulated that the animal in question was an undiscovered and possibly isolated specimen of giant prehistoric cave bear, woken by the constant rumble of the lumber mill. Shell-shocked authorities began to catalog the damage, so intent on their work that they failed to notice that one of their number had vanished, until one of the searchers noticed the victim's blood-stained badge glinting in the snow, and realized that badge was still pinned to his decapitated body. Panic ensued, and with it more carnage. One by one, responding authorities were picked off by this apparently invisible super-predator. Eventually, 2 were able to successfully flee the area and made it back to their station. One succumbed to injuries sustained during the incident. The other, however, survived. This survivor refused to return to the village, insisting that the beast was no bear, but something else entirely, something for which the world had no name. Regardless, authorities issued a warning and offered an astonishing sum for the head of this monstrous bear. Bolstered by the promise of a literal fortune, hunter after hunter sought the creature. Most never returned. The few that did agreed with the first survivor, that this creature was no bear, no wolf, no creature known to man. The bizarre nature of the original incident and the multiple corroborating accounts eventually came to the attention of the Agency of Helping Hands, at which point it dispatched a team of specialized personnel to the village ruins. Due to the terrain and fears of encountering a giant bear mid-burial, the victims and their numerous pieces had been left out in the snow. Upon examination of these remains, agency personnel noted clear indications of a beast returning to its kill, and correctly deduced that the creature responsible was still actively feeding on the cold-preserved corpses. Within hours of arrival, the agency team was attacked by the predator. One member vanished while their backs were turned, his abrupt disappearance signaled by a brief scream that echoed strangely from the surrounding trees. The team successfully traced the scream to a particular copse of trees. Upon approach, all noted that something glittered, strange and high, among the snow-covered foliage. Large silver eyes. Realizing it had been discovered, the creature launched itself out of the branches, a blur of white and gray stained with old blood, camouflage that allowed the creature to hide itself among the snow-mutilated corpses that littered the village. The first agency team failed in its mission, although half of the members did survive. The second, much larger team led by the survivors successfully trapped the creature. Shortly after the creature's capture, a child emerged from one of the homes. The girl was crippled and suffered from other visible disabilities, and appeared incapable of speech. When she saw the creature had been trapped, she ran to the enclosure and attempted to open it. The sight of her further agitated the creature, who was observed trying to pull the girl into its enclosure. Personnel shot the beast, forcing it to release the child before it could inflict injury. Unfortunately, a stray bullet hit the child. Due to the substantial resources at hand, her life was saved. The creature did not necessarily realize this at the time, however, and the immense volume of its vocalizations resulted in an avalanche that damaged his enclosure. Fortunately, agency personnel were able to repair the enclosure with no further casualties. Due to the size and strength of the creature, it was held on-site until specialized transport could be arranged. By this time, the mute girl had healed sufficiently to travel. Since her presence calmed the beast, she was taken into agency custody and housed at the Pantheon in view of the creature until she died of complications related to her gunshot injury 7 months later. For decades, the creature was treated like an abused zoo animal. No one could communicate with it, and no one bothered to attempt to do so until 1966, when an agency caretaker named Patrick W. saw something in the beast that inspired him to make an effort. Patrick W.'s intuition proved correct. Following his personal involvement, the scope of the beast's intelligence quickly became apparent. Its cognitive capabilities exceeded even the most generous of estimations. He even had a name, Numa. Numa possessed the ability to speak, of course, that had been quickly determined upon capture. However, he spoke a language no one at the agency recognized, one that officials dismissed for decades, as one report put it, as nothing more than caveman grunting. With some prodding from Patrick W., Numa began to draw pictographs to accompany his speech. In this way, Numa taught Patrick W. to speak his language. Over time, Patrick W. taught Numa English. Numa was a surprisingly proficient student, driven in part by the fact that he was an intelligent creature that had been completely starved for interaction for the length of a human lifetime. It must be noted that Numa only engages in conversation about topics that interest him. The topic that interests him most is a dire wolf named Pup that he once befriended. The second most interesting topic is the death of Pup. According to Numa, all human beings deserve to die because a band of hunters killed Pup thousands of years ago. Thousands of years ago is an indistinct and flawed yet largely accurate assessment. Numa has not been in agency custody longer than any other inmate, but he is most likely the oldest inmate at the agency. He is unpredictable and prone to outbursts, often with deadly consequences. However, he displays remorse for these episodes of poor behavior and has been observed to weep at the departure of certain caretakers. Secondary to an obsessive desire to punish humans for Pup's death, the most important aspect of Numa's psychology is his inability to comprehend time as we do. Numa appears to disassociate for extraordinarily long periods of time, only holding on to memories that are significant to him. For example, he is at least 14,000 years old, yet the abandonment he experienced as an infant is still fresh in his mind. During sessions, he frequently obsesses over the way his mother screamed when he was torn away from her. The only memories clearer to Numa than memories of his mother are the memories of his pet dire wolf, Pup. Numa seems unable to accept that Pup is long and wholly dead, hence his repeated requests for the agency to bring Pup to him. Note, to date, Numa has refused to discuss or even acknowledge the child with whom he was brought into custody. At this time, the agency has no idea whether she was significant to Numa in any way. The agency located Pup's remains in 1988, so perfectly preserved that most of his soft tissues, including his eyes and nose, were intact. At the time, Patrick W. had recently passed away and Numa was inconsolable. The agency tentatively planned to clone the wolf specifically to stop Numa's frequent tantrums. After rigorous debate, however, it was decided that providing an apex predator with a companion apex predator would further endanger agency personnel. Perhaps more importantly, a clone would simply not be Numa's beloved Pup. Numa's senses are extremely developed compared to that of human beings, and there were concerns that Numa would be able to determine the cloned animal was not actually his pup. Providing a cloned wolf would likely upset Numa and potentially send him into a psychotic spiral that the agency currently has no way of treating or reversing. Numa has a humanoid appearance, although he is significantly larger than any human being. At his full height, he is 9 feet 3 inches tall with shoulders that measure 44 inches across. His body is covered in very fine, semi-transparent fur with reflective properties. This provides Numa with natural camouflage. He has large eyes with white irises, and his face is unusually flat. Proportionally, his mouth is significantly wider than the mouth of an average human being. His teeth are clearly that of a carnivore, but do not resemble the teeth of any known animal. They fall out and regrow frequently. His jaws possess extra bones and joints that allow Numa's mouth to open excessively wide. These extra bones fold parallel to the teeth and are effectively invisible when Numa is speaking or at ease. When Numa feeds or wishes to intimidate agency staff, he unlocks these joints and opens his mouth to its widest point, baring all teeth. Numa's conversations with staff are numerous, repetitive, and generally very short. Despite serious ongoing concerns for my personal safety throughout his treatment, I believe I have made significant progress with Numa. An edited and clarified record of his longest interview to date, which I performed, can be found below. Subject: Numa. Interviewer: Rochelle B. Date: September 17, 2024. Back in the times when I was free and lived in the ice, I found a pup. I did not know what his name was, and it was not my place to name him. I only called him what he is: Pup. Pup was abandoned by his pack, as I had been. My pack left me to die on the ice, for I was not like them. Pup was not like his pack either. He was so very small, with a twisted leg which made him a cripple. I loved him very much. I loved his small wet nose and I loved his bright eyes. I loved that he cried for me when I left our cave to hunt, and I loved that he spun in happy circles when I returned each morning. I have never loved anything so much. I do not think anything has ever loved me as much as Pup. No one loved me back then, The people were cold and harsh in those days, so harsh that soft men like you would not even recognize them as people. They would not recognize you as people either because you are too weak. They did not recognize me as people because I was too strong. But I was not too strong to love crippled things. I found Pup crying in the snow, with ears blackened by the cold and frost on his eyelashes. How the frost glittered in the cold white sun. By the time I found Pup that day in the snow, I had been alone many moons. So many moons that I forgot the faces of my pack, those who had left me to die so long ago. I only remembered that they looked different from me. They had hair of night, not like my hair of ice. Dark eyes to see on the ice, not like my white eyes which were made to hunt in the night. They had teeth like cows, for chewing the grasses and the berries and the dried meats of mammoth that sustained them through the cold moons. My teeth are not like theirs. My teeth, well, you see my teeth. When I saw Pup, I almost left him in the snow. But as I stepped over his stringy body, my white eyes already scanning the tundra for a cave bear or giant elk to eat, Pup's tail wagged. Emi, Emi. I thought of the scavengers, of the giant hyenas and the saber-toothed lions that prowl the ice. I thought of them slinking across the tundra on their hollow, stinking bellies. I thought of this poor crippled thing wagging his tail as they approached him, and of the cry he would make when they betrayed his trust and tore into him with their rotting teeth. Those thoughts brought tears to my white eyes, so I picked Pup out of the snow. His fur was frozen to the ground, which pulled out tufts of it when I raised him up to look. He was so small, I could fit him in one of my hands. My hands, you see them, they are not made for holding, but they held Pup. They held him every day as he grew. He loved me above everything, and I him. Together we were pack. Soon my crippled Pup grew into an adept hunter. With him at my side, we could do one of two things. We could bring down the same amount of game in half the time, or twice the game in the same time. We were gluttons, Pup and I, and we chose to bring down twice the game. Mammoth and hyena, bear and seal, tiger and white lion, none could withstand us. One night, I was very full from my gluttonousness and very satisfied. I had no desire to hunt, but Pup did. He ran back and forth across our cave, jumping upon me, shoving his nose into my face to rouse me. I shoved him away, for we still had meat in our cave. So much, but Pup did not want that meat. He wanted fresh meat, torn hot and steaming from the prey as it screamed and twisted in his jaws. I was too tired and full to hunt, so I told Pup to find it himself. He did. He came back to me some time later, dragging a bloody, hairless body. I thought it was a cub of some kind, or perhaps something diseased. But it was not. It was a man, bloody guts dragging in the snow, eyes wide and shining as the high winter sun. Looking at the man made me laugh. I do not like men. Although I am stronger and older and better than any man, I am not too strong or good to feel hurt, nor so old I cannot remember. I remember what the men in my human pack did to me. I remember how they left me to die in the snow, and how my black-haired mother tried to stop them. She screamed as they dragged her away from me. Her hands stretched for me, and her scream hurt my ears. Even now, I can hear her scream. Even now, it hurts my ears to remember. That is why I laughed to see a dead man, and why I ate even though I was already full and slow. As we ate, I looked upon Pup with pride. How smart he was, my Pup. How right. Men are so much weaker, so much crueler, so much poorer to behold than the majestic elk and the great, monstrous bear. How much better it was to eat small, soft, cruel men than other, grander creatures that belong. That man was the first of many. Men are the easiest to hunt, especially when you catch them alone. And they are the easiest to eat, no fur, no feathers, no great beaks nor thick leather flesh to bite through. Men are cruel and weak and in many ways stupid. They were hard to catch before when they roamed the ice in small bands, following the warm season as it passed through the land. But they no longer lived that way. The men were no longer like those who had banished me from my pack. Now they stayed in one place, these men, all together in shelters they built. I did not know the name of these clustered homes then, but now I know they are called villages. These fools built villages. The men and women and their young together, so easy to find, so easy to eat. Pup and I are gluttons, as I told you. We were gluttons with the people, too. Too gluttonous. Soon our appetites and nightly hunts chased all the men away from the valley. But they did not stay away long. Pup had not even grown grayness on his muzzle by the time the men sought to return. And of course they returned. The ice is desolation for all but the beasts and monsters that belong there. But the valley, this valley that had sprouted in the middle of the endless ice, was fertile and green, drawing all the lions and hyenas, the bears and wolves, the elk and the tigers. The valley had berries and meat, water and shelter from the screaming winds. Living in the valley was easy. Cruel, weak men flourish when life is easy. When that life is stolen from other, grander creatures, it is somehow even easier for them. I was foolish. I was too proud. Although men are weak and cruel, they are not stupid. They knew that Pup and I were the monsters in the valley, the beasts they could not overcome. Although that kept them away for a year, perhaps 2 or 3, I do not remember hunger persuaded them to return, and so did the weeping of their women and the hollow bellies of their children. Hollow-bellied children, hollow-bellied men, so like the hollow-bellied beasts who once slunk across the ice for my pup. Hollow-bellied monsters, all of them. They came for Pup and me, these hollow-bellied men. I did not see them coming. My white eyes were made to hunt in the darkness, not to see the monstrous plans of men. The men found our cave and came in the day, while Pup and I slept. I woke quickly, but not quickly enough to stop them. Only quickly enough to watch them open Pup from throat to haunch. How my poor Pup screamed. How his blood flooded the floor, staining the snow and my hands. I have never loved anything as much as I loved Pup, and I never felt rage such as the rage I felt that morning, looking upon those weak and cruel men. I tore their limbs away and flung them against the walls, streaking the rock with their blood. I opened their hollow, stinking bellies as they opened Pup's. I broke their heads off their foul bodies. I stomped on them until there was nothing left to stomp upon. In each of their faces, I saw my hollow-bellied pack who had abandoned me on the ice. My hard-eyed sire, the crooked-jawed alpha, my screaming mother. How her screams hurt my ears. I killed them all and they could not stop me. But I could not stop them from hurting Pup. I tore their pieces into pieces and those pieces into smaller pieces still and brought them to Pup. He could not move. He lay on his side, blood freezing around his body. When he saw me, his tail thumped against the floor, and I remembered him as he was. The tiny Pup abandoned on the ice, thumping his tail from the moment he first saw me. I gathered him up and carried him to the highest, deepest part of the cave and lay him on his side. His tail did not thump again. I sat beside him, still and silent and waiting in dark so deep even my white eyes could not see within it. There, in that darkness, I waited for Pup to wake. But I waited too long. When the darkness had passed and I was able to see again, Pup was gone from me. You tell me that the years passed and the ice grew over Pup, that he has been dead so long he is buried deep within new ice. No, I know better. Pup is too cunning. He is too wise. Pup waited for me to feed him, to help him, but I did not. I went into darkness for so long that he left, and it was because of men. I kept hunting you, you who hurt my Pup, you who took my Pup away, you who took my mother away, she whose screams still hurt my ears. You took and you take. You will always take, because that is what stinking, hollow-bellied monsters have always done, and it is what you will always do. You men got weaker as the moons passed. Softer, weaker, stupider, easier to catch, easier to eat. But you never became less cruel. No, you only became more cruel. You are so cruel that you will not even let me be free. You trap me like stupid, weak game in a burrow, yet you wonder why I am angry. You wonder why I rage. Now I have told you, it is Pup, and I promise you this, I will no longer be angry nor will I rage at you. Not at you, if you find my Pup and bring him to me. I get so sad, thinking of him alone on the ice among the hollow-bellied beasts. The sadness is why I rage at you, so I will stop if you bring him to me. I promise you, please bring him back. Please, I miss him so. Ever since I was a kid, I've been fascinated with the ocean. My mom hated it, She used to tell me all the time, if God intended for us to know about the ocean, He wouldn't have put so many obstacles between us and the bottom of it. I thought that was a bit reductionist, but when I insisted on studying biological oceanography and ocean engineering, she was as supportive as she could possibly be. College was the best time in my life. I loved my studies. My mom and I even bonded over it as she let me tell her all about what I was learning about the ocean. Even though she didn't love the field I chose, she still pitched in for my education and encouraged me to live at home until I was done. She was my biggest supporter. 2 weeks after I graduated college, my dad died, and with his death, my mom seemed to lose all her will to live. She tried to hold on for me, but every day I could see the light slipping from her eyes a little more. She died the day after my interview for my dream job, and to this day I'm convinced she did that on purpose. She knew her time was coming, and she waited so I wouldn't miss my interview. My friends always tell me that's a little morbid, but when I light candles for my mom's spirit, I can feel her there with me, and I know it's true. Anyway, I got the call with the job offer a few days after her funeral. Another small blessing that I knew came from her, and despite wanting to just lay down and give up on everything, I accepted the job. I was still heartbroken about losing both of my parents within a few months of each other, but the job was everything I had dreamed and more. After a few years, I was given the opportunity to join a team that was researching previously unexplored parts of the ocean. I got assigned to the coolest place ever, the Bermuda Triangle. I know, we all grew up hearing stories about the Bermuda Triangle, and most of them can be explained by science and weather patterns. But the stories that can't be explained by science, unfortunately, I can offer you an explanation for. Turns out my mom was right, sometimes obstacles are there for a reason. The first few weeks of our research expedition were exciting. We had a place we were staying in Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, but since that's still a good 640 miles from our research site, we also had a fairly nice boat we were staying on, and the team got funds for a submarine. I won't bore you with all the scientific details of our expedition, but after about 2 months, we were granted permission to send 4 people into the Bermuda Triangle in a submarine. Our team lead decided she would select 3 people to go with her, and out of our 11-person team, we knew there would be a lot of disappointed people. She said she would give us her decision individually to avoid the awkwardness for everyone who wasn't selected. I was a bundle of nerves for the whole week it took her to decide, but on a bright, beautiful Sunday morning, Marnie found me in my bunk and told me I had been selected. To be honest, a part of me knew deep down that I was going to be picked. There was no way all of these things would have lined up so perfectly, just for me to be left behind while someone else went on the submarine trip. As it turns out, we would all be better off if someone else had been selected. 3 days later, we were ready to take the submarine down to the ocean floor. The people in our group were myself, Marnie, an older man named Jacob, a guy about my age named Evan, and the 90-person crew running the submarine. We all had our hopes for what we would discover, but I think everyone was just elated to be a part of something so big. The first few days in the submarine were mostly spent getting our bearings, charting, mapping, and getting used to being so deep underwater. After that, we were able to use some pretty high-tech equipment that looked a lot like the suits astronauts wear to actually leave the submarine. I still lay awake at night and think about what that was like. The ocean was dark. It reminded me of fog, actually, the way you can see up to a certain point before it all blurs into one meaningless color. Only instead of fog, we were in an inky darkness all the time. I could see a few feet in front of me at any given moment. The wonders of the ocean hidden behind a cold, wet, dark veil, all there for me and my team to uncover. After a couple days of collecting samples and specimens, Jacob and I made a huge discovery. Caught between a rock and the ocean floor was a scuba suit, in a design neither of us had ever seen before. Our suits, top-of-the-line equipment not currently available to the public, looked a lot like spacesuits. This one looked like a toddler had tried to copy what we were wearing, but lacked the ability to really do it justice. The hands looked like mittens, almost exactly the way a small child would think to draw them. The helmet was oddly oblong and looked like a large bucket with holes cut out for the eyes and mouth. The eye and mouth holes were covered with glass, and the top of the helmet was rounded instead of flat like a bucket would be, giving it an odd misshapen appearance. The body was misshapen as well, with a barrel-like torso and uneven arms and legs. While I couldn't tell what the helmet was made from, it was clear that the body seemed to be made out of leather. The helmet and body almost seemed suctioned or glued together. There was no zipper, no buttons, no way I could see to dismantle it in order to put it on. More importantly, it was clear the suit was very old, but it showed none of the signs of damage that something like that should have after sitting at the bottom of the ocean for so long. Jacob and I glanced at each other, then rushed toward the strange sight as if we were both thinking the same thing. We worked together to move the rock off it, then cleared the debris that had gathered around the suit, mostly fish bones and small carcasses. We did so in complete silence, but despite the lack of words, I knew we were both beyond excited. Whatever this was, we were on the cusp of an incredible discovery. We freed the strange-looking diverse suit and carried it back to the submarine. An hour later, Jacob and I stood with the rest of the crew. Everyone hovered around the table we had placed it on. We had debated for a while if we thought it would hold up, bringing it out of the water and into a strange atmosphere, and Marnie logically decided we needed to resurface as quickly as possible so we could get the suit to a temperature and moisture-controlled storage facility. She told the submarine captain, and he said he would prepare us to resurface first thing on the following day. In the meantime, Marnie told us to work our asses off to get as much done as possible before departure. She told us that if the submarine went back down, she would probably give other people on the team the opportunity to be on the crew. That was disappointing, but I agreed it was only fair. We put the suit in the storage room we had reserved for samples, locked the door, and went back to work. That night was when the first unusual thing occurred. Around 1 in the morning, I woke up to piercing shrieks and raced out of my bunk into the hallway. One of the crew members, Rodriguez I think, was kneeling on the floor, clutching his head and screaming. The captain knelt next to him, trying to talk over the sound of his screams. But all we could hear was Rodriguez repeating over and over, "The eyes, it's eyes." Nobody knew what that meant, but his fear was both palpable and contagious. The captain assured us that sometimes people struggle with being underwater for very long, and Rodriguez would get the best medical and psychiatric care possible once we got back to the surface. He insisted we all go back to bed, and everyone complied, slinking off to our bunks like a bunch of chastised children. The first thing I did in the morning was go back to the captain and ask if Rodriguez was okay. The captain smiled in greeting and assured me that Rodriguez was a bit sick, but they were sure he would be just fine. I thanked him, and as I was leaving I heard him call out, "If God wanted us to explore the ocean, we would have gills." It was my mom's favorite joke. Every time I talked about new advances in oceanic technology, she would say that to me with a smile and a pat on the arm. I turned around and stared at the captain. I said, "What was that?" He was already facing away from me and glanced back over his shoulder. "Sorry." "What?" I knew my face was tight, my voice reflecting my nerves. "What did you say?" As I was walking away, "You said something about exploring the ocean." He gave me a concerned look. "Are you okay, Dr. Williams?" I didn't say anything. I nodded, every muscle in my body feeling like a tense rubber band. Yes, I'm fine, thank you." I guess I was just lost in my thoughts. As I walked out, he muttered, "Can't have another crazy on my ship." I made my way back to the sample room, which was once again unlocked, and joined Marnie where she stood next to the area we had reserved just for the diving suit. Marnie had sent Evan out after Jacob, and I came back to chip some pieces off the rock that had pinned the diving suit to the ocean floor, and he had also collected some bits of detritus around the area as well, like fish bones and other carcasses. I walked over and said, "Have you had a chance to crack the suit open?" Marnie smirked, knowing I was messing around, and said, "Right, because I want to be the ocean version of the guy who destroyed the city of Troy." "No, but there's the craziest thing." I lifted an eyebrow and Marnie went on, "I don't think there's a body in here." I looked over at the diving suit and felt a strange pang of fear shoot through me. "How did it get down there then?" Marnie shrugged, unbothered. "Maybe it dropped off a boat or something. We might never get an answer to that, but we can do some testing on it to see when it was made and what it's made from." I scooted away from the wetsuit, the room feeling claustrophobic now. "Have you had a chance to run any tests? Or are you waiting until we resurface?" Marnie started to answer, when the door opened and a sheepish-looking crew member walked in. He said, "Doctors, I'm sorry to bother you, but I have some bad news. We aren't going to be able to resurface today after all. We're experiencing serious technical issues." Marnie and I both looked at each other. mirroring the panic on each other's faces. And in her best stern voice she said, "Define serious issues." The crew member glanced over his shoulder as if he was waiting for someone to step in and take over for him. Then he replied, "I'll let you have that conversation with the captain. All he told me to pass along was that we're experiencing some strange weather that's interfering with the radar, and he doesn't feel safe resurfacing until it passes. He can lower us back to the ocean floor so you can continue your research though." Marnie sighed and passed a hand over her face, looking weary. "Yes, tell him that would be good. And please update us at your earliest convenience." She stressed the word earliest with a look on her face that always made lab assistants duck their heads and promise to do whatever she asked. The crew member was no different, and he turned to flee quickly. Before he could escape, I said, "Wait, what about Rodriguez? Is he going to be okay?" The crew member went pale and said, We don't know. Captain Cameron says dash." He stopped and squared his shoulders back. "He'll be fine. We'll get back to the surface as soon as we're able. And in the meantime, he's fine in Med Bay." I let him run out then, and turned to Marnie, who had already turned her own attention back to the samples. Before I could ask her thoughts on what was happening, she started giving me instructions, and I ran over to help her with the tests. If we had to be stuck underwater, we might as well be productive. While the equipment we had on the sub was good, it wasn't the equipment we needed to safely test the material of the suit, so we focused on analyzing the other specimens we took from the site instead. As we worked, I felt like the suit was a third person in the room, watching and judging silently as we worked. Jacob and Evan joined us at some point, and the four of us made plans for how we would use our time until the sub could resurface. Marnie was mostly frustrated that we didn't have a timeline. She wanted to map out as much time as possible, but hesitated to do that if she didn't know how much time we had. Jacob and I encouraged her to schedule our days as if we were going to be staying for the full 5 days we would have had left, and promised to do all her top priority items first. With that settled, we went to the mess hall for dinner. When we got there, I noticed that there seemed to be fewer people than usual. Rodriguez was missing, obviously, but I also noticed one of the female crew members I had started bonding with was gone too. I grabbed my food and sat down across from someone I had seen talking with her before. I smiled and said, "Hi, I'm Mara Williams, one of the researchers. Do you know where Claire Mason is?" The crew member, I thought his name was Reynolds, gave me a weird look, then shook his head, stood, and left his half-eaten tray of food where it was. I watched Reynolds walk away, feeling equal parts confused and irritated. A few minutes later, Marnie walked over and grabbed my arm. In a harsh whisper, she said, "You need to come with me." I stepped out into the hallway, feeling anxiety wringing my stomach like a dish rag. Marnie didn't say anything, but we walked down the hall until we reached sick bay. Once we got there, Captain Cameron stepped out with a concerned look on his face. I had last spoken with him that morning, and in that time it was as if he had aged 20 years. He waited for us to step inside, then shut the door and said in a hushed voice, "Thank you both for coming. I'm sorry to be treating this so clandestine, but I have some concerns. I think you'll understand." He took a deep breath before continuing. "We seem to be having a problem with psychosis on board. You both saw what happened with Rodriguez. In the last 24 hours, we've had 2 more crew members experience the same thing. That may not sound like a lot, but when you're on a machine like this one, you need every person to be in the best health possible." He stepped aside and we saw Rodriguez, Claire, and another crew member I thought was named Anderson, all laying in their beds. They were asleep, they seemed peaceful. Cameron continued, "They're sedated. Every time they wake up they start screaming again, and we want to keep this quiet from as many people as possible. I told the crew we believe there's a bout of mono going around, and to be cautious and stay out of sickbay. It's not a good solution, but it's what we have right now. I need you two to see if you can figure out what's going on." Marnie lifted an eyebrow and put one hand on her hip. "We're not equipped for that, Captain. Neither of us have a degree in medicine or psychology. Don't you have a doctor on board?" Captain Cameron gave her a look that I can only describe as pure desperation. "Our medic isn't equipped for this either, and we don't have a psychologist for this expedition because it was supposed to be a short one. Please just do blood tests, something. Work with our medic and use any of his equipment that you need to. Figure out what's going on." Captain Cameron left, and I turned to Marnie and said, "This all started the night after we found the diving suit. Do you think we brought some kind of bacteria into the ship that's making people sick?" Marnie winced. "Shit. I hope not, but maybe we did. I'll go take a sample from it to see if there's anything weird. You go finish your dinner." She started to leave, then stopped. "And Mara, do not speak a word of this to anyone. We want to keep this quiet." I sulked back to the mess hall, feeling like my trip of a lifetime was slowly blossoming into a nightmare. I finished my food, then went back to sickbay to check in with Marnie. She wasn't there, and the medic was back, but he hadn't seen her either. Concerned now, I went back to the storage room. Sitting on the floor in the corner of the room was Marnie, tears flooding her cheeks, her eyes looking hollow and glassy. I ran to her side. "Marnie? Marnie? Are you okay? What's going on?" She didn't speak, didn't move, just sat there like a shell of a person. I ran from the room to the sick bay and told the medic what was going on, then went to the control room to look for the captain. When I told him what happened to Marnie and what our suspicions were, his face grew hard. He said, "Lock the room you've got that thing in and don't let anyone touch it. If one more person gets sick, I'm making you and your team get rid of it. And I'll make you bleach the entire storage room to make sure no one else gets sick." I apologized for all the trouble, agreed to his conditions, and left to update Evan and Jacob. I know Marnie told me not to, but with her out of commission, I needed as much support from the rest of our team as possible. When I got to the men's bunk area, Evan and Jacob were both there looking tense. They motioned me inside, and we huddled together on Jacob's bed. Jacob leaned in and whispered, "About 20 minutes after you and Marnie left, we heard more screaming. Rugen this time. He was in the hallway near the storage room, clutching his eyes, and..." Jacob hesitated as if he wasn't sure how to explain it. He was begging for forgiveness. I don't know what about or to whom, but he kept saying, "I didn't mean to. I'm sorry," over and over. Evan took in a shaky breath and said, "We tried to help, but the person you were sitting with before Marnie grabbed you, I think his name is Reynolds, he pushed us away and told us not to say anything." My mind reeled. It seemed like something about the suit really was making people sick. Maybe Rugen had gone into the storage room for some reason. Or maybe, an even worse thought, the bacteria on the suit that was causing this had migrated from the storage room somehow. An image popped into my head of invisible bacteria crawling along the floor, lit by a black light showing it moving in waves towards new victims. I looked up at my two teammates and said, "Cameron, Marnie, and I think the diving suit we found might have something to do with all this. Like maybe there's some kind of bacteria on it causing all this. And with Marnie in sick bay now too, I think we may be right." We all stared at each other for a long time before Jacob said, "This is bad." Evan and I nodded our agreement. Then Evan asked, "Well, now what do we do? We can't get rid of the suit. Who knows what kind of discoveries we can make with it?" And he cast his face down. "And this discovery could put all of our names on the map, you know? We could be something." Jacob put a fatherly hand on Evan's arm. "Safety is far more important, Evan. Don't sacrifice lives to have your name on a plaque in some museum." He turned back to me and said, "I think we need to put the diving suit back in the ocean, Mara. Some things weren't meant to be found." I looked back and forth between Evan and Jacob, feeling the weight of being the tiebreaker resting on me like an anchor. Finally, I made the worst mistake of my life. I said, "I think we should try to stop whatever this is before we put the diving suit back. We came all this way, and I think it's what Marnie would want." I could tell Jacob wanted to argue with me more, but when I mentioned Marnie, he closed his mouth and lowered his eyes. We agreed to meet in the storage room in an hour to try and find a way to keep the suit quarantined so no one else would get sick. The running theory was that some kind of bacteria was causing encephalitis, swelling in the brain, that was causing hallucinations and catatonia. We didn't have the right tools on board to properly diagnose them, but it was a good place to start. The three of us split up to look for supplies that might help. Evan left to look for cleaning supplies. I went to Med Bay to get masks and gloves, and Jacob simply said he had an idea and ran off on his own. We had agreed to meet up outside the men's quarters again, which were thankfully on the other side of the building from the storage room. A little after 9, I rejoined Jacob in the hallway. When he saw me, he sighed and said, "I knew it. I have a bad feeling." I lifted an eyebrow. What do you mean? He gestured around us vaguely. Evan isn't here. I haven't seen him since we parted ways, and finding cleaning supplies shouldn't have taken very long. I shook my head and handed him the gloves and mask. Throw these on and let's go check. Jacob sighed again. I had hoped to stay away from that area until we can deal with this. But all right, let's go. We walked to the storage room together, and when we got there, Jacob pulled me gently away from the door so he could enter first. When we walked in, neither of us were surprised to see Evan laying on the floor, hands over his head, sobbing. Jacob and I walked over and dragged Evan to his feet and carried him to sick bay. When we got there, we found a horrible sight. Somehow, in the last hour, 10 more crew members had gotten sick. We had started with a smaller crew, around 90 crew members, 30 people per shift, 3 shifts if I remembered correctly. Since we were a smaller sub, we didn't need as many people. We were now down 15 people, including Marnie and Evan. We were quickly turning into a skeleton crew, and while I didn't know very much about submarines, I had a feeling that was really bad. After we dropped Evan off, Jacob and I went to find Captain Cameron. We opened the sickbay door, and before I could process what I was seeing, Jacob had pushed me to the floor and slammed the door shut. Walking down the hallway was the diving suit. It slumped and lurched as though only one part of it at a time was able to hold itself up. We watched through the port window in the door as a crew member came around the corner and ran into the diving suit. The man smirked, as though he thought someone was playing a prank on him, and looked into the eyes of the mask. His face fell, his eyes widened, and he began sobbing. I tried. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to let her drown. I was only a kid. He continued to sob, curling up into a ball on the floor as the diving suit continued to move. Jacob pulled me away from the window and placed his back to the door, blocking the port. We stared at each other in silence for a long time before he said, "Okay, this is bad and hard to believe." I nodded, feeling panic wrapping its cold, clammy hands around my throat. "What's happening? Is someone in the suit?" Jacob took slow, steady breaths, and I did my best to copy him. After a few minutes, he said, "I don't think so. I don't know. I don't think we can explain this." He turned and looked out the window again and took a deep breath. "We need to get back to the men's bunk." I grabbed our wet suits, and I think we'll need them. I was able to manage a small smile. Jacob was a good person to have on my team. We made our way out of the med bay, both of us shielding our eyes with our hands to avoid looking directly at the eyes of the suit. As much as I wanted to believe there was some logical answer, it seemed like people were having breakdowns only after looking in its eyes. We moved slowly, taking small, careful steps as we walked down the hallway. We could hear more screams echoing around the ship. They seemed to be coming from the other side of the ship, which was good, but it wouldn't be hard for the creature to catch up with us. We finally got to the bunk room and Jacob threw the door open, both of us barreling inside quickly, and we collapsed to the floor in a relieved heap. Jacob was breathing heavily, his face red, and I was worried he might have a heart attack. I found a bottle of water and passed it to him, then waited for him to recover. Finally, his breathing steadied, and he nodded to me gratefully, then pointed across the room to where 3 diving suits sat on his bunk. I rushed forward and carried his over first, then grabbed my own and put it on. Once we were both fully suited up, I turned to Jacob and asked, "What now?" He gave me a stern look and said, "We have to get that thing off the ship. It's too risky to try and contain it." I felt the words like a deep blow and hung my head with shame. "You're right. I'm sorry." Jacob put his hand on my shoulder and gave me a tight smile. "We'll make this right. Don't worry about it too much." We both put our helmets on and stepped into the hallway. Jacob carried the body of the 3rd diving suit, I carried the helmet, and we made our way towards the control room, hoping Captain Cameron would be in there. The plan was to find Captain Cameron and get the word out around the ship that the thing could only hurt you if you looked into its eyes. We still weren't entirely sure what happened if you looked at it, but what we had seen so far was disturbing enough that neither of us wanted to try. I followed Jacob through the ship as he led us away from the screams, taking a more circuitous route to the control room as we avoided the shambling creature. When we arrived at the control room, Captain Cameron beckoned us in with a relieved look on his face. There were 11 crew members crammed into the small control room, and once we joined them, we were officially at capacity. We handed Captain Cameron the diving suit and explained the plan. He nodded, looking grim, and said, "That's better than risking anyone else's safety. How about I lead the creature towards the exit hatch as a distraction? You two just get over there safely and wait. Novak will watch the cameras in there and release the hatch once you three and the creature are safely inside." He gave us a pitying look. "I wish I didn't have to put you two in so much danger, but I don't see another option." Jacob and I both nodded resolutely, and I said, "It was my decision to bring this thing on board. I want to do what I can to make it right." Jacob put his hand on my shoulder and said, "I was involved with that decision too, and I second this one. Let's fix our mistake." Captain Cameron nodded, slipped into his diving suit, and the three of us stepped into the hallway. Jacob pointed to the right and then at Captain Cameron and nodded, then pointed to the left and gestured for me to follow him. We made our way down the hall towards the exit hatch. It was a sealed, pressure-controlled room that we could use to come and go for specimen collections. It was also exactly big enough to hold me, Jacob, and the creature. The few crew members we passed, we warned about what was happening and told them to hide somewhere safe and keep their heads down. I was starting to get nervous about the number of people we had sedated in Med Bay now. I don't know exactly how many people it takes to run a submarine, but with people dropping like flies, we had to be down to the wire. It wasn't long before we could hear scraping and shuffling coming down the hallway towards us. Captain Cameron rounded the corner, walking backwards with his head down. I glanced at Jacob and realized that if the thing pursued Cameron instead of us, we would never be able to get rid of it. I stepped away from the doorway and put myself between the creature and Captain Cameron. It didn't break stride, but when Cameron shuffled off to the side, it didn't change course to pursue him. I took over, walking backwards, until I made my way into the isolation room. It shambled after me, but didn't stop when I put my back against the wall. It kept moving towards me until it had me pinned against the exit hatch. I kept my eyes down but called out, in a shrill voice laced with panic, "Jacob, he's got me pinned." Just as I finished speaking, I felt a hard slam and glanced up just enough to see the creature reeling back before slamming its head into my helmet again. I watched in terror as a small spider web appeared in the glass. The creature put its hands on either side of the helmet to hold me in place just as Jacob was able to open the hatch behind us. Water rushed in and the creature was sucked out into the inky blackness. I had been able to get a good look at its hands before it was sucked out, and my stomach sank with dread. I was almost certain the suit was stitched from human skin. Even with that fresh panic, I was thrilled gravity and physics took care of the problem for us. Then a leathery hand reached back inside, wrapped itself around my ankle, and yanked me into the cold, dark ocean. Despite our depth, I could tell a storm was raging above us. The water would briefly light up with a lightning flash, revealing the tide battering everything in its path on the surface. I could only see the creature when the lightning would flash, but I could tell it was trying to get back to the submarine with me in tow. I fought and kicked, trying to get away, but the grip it had on me was inhuman, making all my struggles to get away seem meaningless. I was about ready to give up hope when I saw something come down on the creature's hand. Jacob had found a large rock and brought it down on the wrist part of the suit. It weakened the thing's grip just enough for me to get away, and I crawled backwards. In the momentary flashes of light, I could see Jacob fighting to get away, and I began searching for a rock too. I could see the spider web in my helmet growing, and I knew it wouldn't be very long before the pressure would break through and drown me. I found a medium-sized rock and fought against the water pressure to lift it. At some point, Jacob got free from the creature and helped me lift the rock, and together we carried it to where the creature was pinned by the rocks Jacob had been able to grab, struggling to free itself. We dropped the rock on its sternum as the lightning flashed, illuminating the thing's eyes, just as I looked at them. Instantly, I was transported somewhere else. It was a sunny day in November, unusually warm and bright, and I walked down a hospital hallway. I was moving slowly, even though the nurses had called to tell me to hurry. I had been scared. I knew my mom was close and I wasn't ready to say goodbye. I think part of me had hoped that if I never got to the room, I would never have to see her die. In a sense, I was right. I didn't have to watch her die, because she had already passed when I got to the room. The nurse said if I had only been 1 minute earlier, I might have been able to say goodbye. In the memory, I sank to my knees in the doorway of my mom's room and began weeping. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned around, expecting to see a doctor, but instead I found myself looking right into the face of the diving suit. When we made eye contact, I was plunged again into a memory. This time I found myself kneeling at my dad's graveside as my mom sobbed beside me. It was the moment I had known I would lose my mom as well, one of the most painful days of my life. Again I felt a hand on my shoulder, but this time I looked down, saw the human leather glove, and closed my eyes tight. I felt the creature turn me around, could feel its face inches from mine, but I refused to open my eyes. I could feel its rage radiating out from it as the hands moved from my shoulders to my sternum and began tearing my chest cavity open. The fingers sank into the soft skin and tissue between my breasts, biting through the meat of my flesh and wrapping around my bones. I could feel my rib cage bending and instinctively opened my eyes as I screamed. I was instantly plunged into another memory, this one from the time I had dealt with a stalker in college. But this time I was ready, and as soon as I felt the creature's hand on my shoulder, I bolted. I ran through the hallways of my old college until it faced into the green and gray of the cemetery my parents were buried in. I forced myself not to falter as I ran past my crying mother, the creature still shambling after me. The cemetery faded until it was replaced by the hospital, and I continued to run despite the burn in my chest and arms. I reminded myself it was a dream, a hallucination, but the terror remained. After what felt like years, the hallway faded into black, and I woke up. When I woke, I was in a regular hospital bed. Marnie was in the bed next to me, the curtain between us pulled back. Her face looked drawn and tired, older than I remembered. I took a moment to get my bearings, then pressed the call button for a nurse. A nurse wearing light purple scrubs walked in and lifted her eyebrows in surprise when she saw me. She said, "Oh my God, you're awake. This is incredible. Let me call your doctor." She rushed over and did something on the computer next to me, took my vitals, then ran from the room. She entered a few minutes later with a doctor in tow. They fussed over me for a while and gave me a little information, but I got the real story from Captain Cameron when he arrived. Captain Cameron, or Nate as he told me to call him, told me what had happened. He said that Jacob and I had just managed to pin the creature when I had fallen to my knees and begun sobbing. Jacob carried me back to the submarine and put me in the isolation chamber. When they opened it, I was there and catatonic, but Jacob wasn't. They weren't sure exactly what happened to him. They think he got grabbed by the creature, or maybe it was starting to get free and he ran back to stop it. Either way, Jacob had sacrificed his life to save mine. They hadn't been able to recover him. As soon as the creature was securely trapped, the storm had calmed and what was left of the crew had taken the submarine back to the surface. It was a hard journey. Apparently the storm had been a rough one, and on a skeleton crew it was extra hard. Apparently by the time we had gotten the creature off the ship, a total of 41 crew mates had been affected by it. Those of us who had been affected by the creature were taken to the hospital, and according to Nate, only a few of us woke up. I was among the first group to wake up, and even now, almost 6 years later, 8 of those people are still catatonic. I take responsibility for every single one of them. Marnie woke up eventually, and even though she said she didn't blame me for what happened, I was still removed from her team. That's okay. I'm not as interested in the ocean as I used to be. Turns out, the ocean hides some secrets for a reason. Story number 3. Something keeps trying to open the doors to my house at night. I live in a reasonably safe suburban neighborhood in Connecticut, though I won't disclose what town or area in particular. I get along well with all of my neighbors, and it's almost like the people on our street are part of one big family, as cliché as that may sound. I'm currently by myself in what I'm sure most people would consider a nice house. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a nicely furnished kitchen downstairs, a garage, you get the deal. I've done well for myself as a financial analyst, but I just haven't had the time to find anybody else to share my success with. I guess most people would consider me lonely. The only family I have, or had, I suppose. My father passed recently, and I'm still trying to figure out how to grieve on my own. I'm seeing a therapist, and my current mental state hasn't really been improving as much as I'd hoped for. Anyways, my personal life isn't what I came to this subreddit to write about. The other night, I was sitting at the couch and finalizing details for my dad's funeral. This couch faces away from the entrance to the house. Sleep was starting to overtake me when I heard a sort of clicking noise behind me, coming from the door, so I got up and looked out the peephole to see who was there. I always keep my doors locked. I guess I just have a habit of keeping people out. Anyways, I couldn't see anybody at the front step, so I shrugged and returned to the sofa to keep doing paperwork. Right after, I checked the time, and it was 11:30 at night. Around a half hour later, just when I was starting to fall asleep again, there was another click from the doorknob. I sighed and got up, checked the peephole and saw nobody. Yet again, I turned around, yawned, rubbed my eyes, and as that happened, there was a third click behind me. Muttering a curse under my breath, I grabbed a baseball bat that I keep in a closet just down the hall. I'd say that took me about 5 seconds, tops, and when I pushed the door open, nobody was there. Directly across the street, from behind her kitchen window, I saw old Mrs. Smith hold her hand up to wave at me. When her eyes glanced over the bat in my hands, her eyes widened slightly and she raised an eyebrow. I made an irritated shrugging motion and went back inside. This went on for about a week before I got really pissed and called the police and explained to them that somebody was trying to open the door to my house at night. They told me, and I quote, "Okay, what do you want us to do about it?" I politely, I should add, suggested that maybe they should send a cop to watch my home for the night and catch whatever hoodlum is playing this prank. The person I talked to pretty much laughed and said that wasn't a possibility since they need every patrolman on duty for actual harmful crimes going on in other parts of the city. I figured they'd say something like that, but knowing the police couldn't help until this person actually made a move on me seemed to make the situation feel more real, if that makes sense. Last week was when things got worse. So much worse. At this point, I'd gotten seriously tired of trying to do anything in the living room downstairs when whoever was outside kept trying to open my front door and get inside. So the entirety of my afternoons were now spent upstairs in my room, watching television or reading, or most of the time, looking out the window that looks directly over my porch. I never see anything. When I would walk downstairs to get some food, there'd never be a sound from the door. So I thought whoever was doing this must have gotten bored of their stupid game when I stopped going outside to figure out where they were. Then, last week, while laying down on my bed and finishing a finance report, I almost jumped out of my skin when I heard a slow tap, tap, tap on my, thankfully locked, bedroom door, as if somebody was drumming on it with their fingernail. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, and while I was on the phone with the dispatcher, whoever was outside the door continued to make that slow, rhythmic tapping noise. The police arrived around 20 minutes later, and the tapping noise persisted the whole time I was waiting on the phone. I was sitting in my closet when I heard, in this order, a car pull up outside my house, a car door open and close, the tapping stop, and a knock on the door. The dispatcher confirmed that I was okay with them knocking down the door, and I said it was fine. Long story short, they found nobody in the house, no sign of a break-in, no sign that somebody had even been around the place except for me. The next day I had a meeting with my therapist, and he suggested the idea that I may be suffering from auditory hallucinations, which seems unlikely to me since my family doesn't have a history of mental instability or anything like that as far as I'm aware. Every night now, that tapping happens at my bedroom door. I called 911 the next 2 times, and essentially the same thing as the first night happened. The police showed up. No sign of anybody except me even coming within 15 feet of the house. I can't sleep anymore. When I put my head down to the pillow, I can hear footsteps downstairs, even while the tapping is happening at my door. One time, I tried yelling as loud as I could for, "Whoever is in here to get the fuck out before I get my gun." I don't actually have a firearm. Laws in Connecticut regarding stuff like that are very strict, and, though it sounds very dumb, I'd never thought something like this would happen to me. Anyways, after I yelled that one time, whatever was out there stopped tapping abruptly and then, almost smugly, continued its racket slightly louder and faster. The sounds used to be slow, almost methodical, just loud enough to hear, and they'd always stop in the morning. Now it's constant, fast, loud, tapping and clicks and heavy footsteps downstairs, for hours at a time, morning or night. Even when the noise is gone, I'm still afraid to walk around in my house. What if it's in the walls, or under the floor, or some other crazy shit? I ordered one of those Ring doorbells and put it on my bedroom door about a month ago from the time of writing this post. Then I sat on my bed and watched the pitch-black hallway on the other side of the door through the Ring app on my phone. At around 12, I heard the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced in my life. The doorbell camera didn't show anything, but there was a hissing sound outside my bedroom that filled the whole house, like the biggest snake in the world was crammed into the upstairs hall. It was almost as if the walls themselves were making the sound. And then it changed from a hiss to a snarl, and whatever was outside was throwing itself into the door and shaking it on its frame. I shrieked in terror and dialed 911 for a fourth time, and the dispatcher gave no indication that she could hear the cacophony of banging and wild, desperate roars outside my room. This time, it took about 40 minutes for the cops to arrive, and just like the last few times, once they pulled up in their patrol car, the noises ceased immediately. The police didn't seem happy. The door was undamaged. Again, no sign that anybody, after this encounter, I was pretty damn sure it was a thing and not a one, or anything had been in or around the house. Now they've slapped me with a court summons. It's supposed to be tomorrow. I've been fired from my job because I'm too afraid to leave the house, and I've used up all my PTO, sick leave, etc. There's no food either for the same reason, so I've pretty much been starving for the last week and a half. Luckily, I pay for my internet yearly rather than monthly, and I have enough money saved up to pay for the utility bills and house payments, at least for now. What am I supposed to do here? The police want to throw me in jail or at least fine me for wasting their time, and I don't have a job anymore. The neighbors think I'm crazy, and none of them will testify on my behalf. Story number 4. For days ago, my missing son returned. Only I don't have a son. Day 1. It was Friday morning. I started my day nursing a hangover from the night before, drinking my way through a pot of coffee and munching on toaster strudels. Real healthy? I know. I had a morning filled with Zoom meetings and was feeling thankful for the option to keep the camera off because, let's face it, I'm not as young as I used to be, and good Lord, does a night of drinking do some damage. Anyway, as I was going into my last meeting before lunch, my phone rang. I silenced it quickly and set it face down so I wouldn't be distracted. It's no good to be off cam and distracted. After the meeting, I forgot all about the call and got up from my desk to make myself some lunch. A salad with grilled chicken cancels out the toaster strudel, right? Right? Just as I sat back at my desk, my phone rang again. When I picked it up, I saw I had 5 missed calls. 2 from my husband, Dylan, and 3 from a number I didn't recognize. What the heck? I dropped my fork and mashed the answer button. It was the latter that was calling me back. Hello. Hi. Is this Mrs. Harding? Who's this? I asked. This is Detective Phillips from the police department. My mind jumped to the missed calls from Dylan. Oh God, did something happen to him? Car accident? A shootout? Fuck. My heart was beating out of my chest. Words lodged in my throat like a wad of wet bread. I sputtered, then asked, "Is my husband all right?" "What?" the detective said, obviously confused. "My husband," I gasped. "Is that what you're calling about?" "Oh, no, ma'am." "Thank God," I breathed. "What can I do for you?" "Ma'am, I'm calling because we found your son." Shock prickled through me. "Excuse me? Your son, ma'am, we found him. He turned up at the police station last night, and we were able to positively identify him this morning." My mind started spinning at the detective's words. He must have the wrong Mrs. Harding. I don't have a son. I don't have any children at all. Dylan and I never wanted them. We have a nice life, just the 2 of us and our dog, Gus. Financially, we do well. We can pick up and travel whenever we want. Besides, I just never had that maternal instinct. And there's nothing freaking wrong with that, despite what my mother thinks. "Hello? Ma'am? Did you hear what I said?" The detective's voice jarred me from my thoughts. Yeah, but we need you to come down to the station. Your husband is already on his way." Dylan was? "Why? I think you must have the wrong number." Detective Phillips. "Shit," he swore. "Is this Alyssa Harding, address 563 Pine Tree Court?" "Yes, it is, but..." "Phew," the detective said. "Thought I'd really messed up there. You're definitely the Mrs. Harding I'm looking for. Please, come down to the station at 555 Wilson Avenue ASAP. Before I could get another word out, the call disconnected. I pulled the phone back from my head and stared at it in disbelief. I was the Mrs. Harding he was looking for? It didn't make any sense. What made less sense was that Dylan was headed to the station, too. I logged off work, changed out of my work clothes, consisting of yoga pants and an old t-shirt, and pulled my hair up into a messy bun. Gus tap danced around me as I hurriedly got ready. Then I dropped a treat on the floor so he wouldn't get mad when I left him. Outside, there was a warm breeze, odd for an afternoon in mid-November. Something about it just felt wrong. My hands trembled the whole way to the police station as I navigated my Prius through the leaf-strewn streets. I pulled up outside the low brick building and heard my name the second I stepped out onto the street. I turned. Dylan was rushing toward me, a grin plastered on his face. I almost didn't recognize him. Alyssa, God, I tried to call you twice. Why didn't you pick up? I was in meetings all morning, I said, thrown off by his intensity. What is going on, Dylan? Didn't you talk to the detective? He asked, grabbing my hand. He pulled me toward the glass entrance to the building with such force. I stumbled over the broken concrete a couple of times. Yes, but I don't understand, I said, breathing heavy. Something was really wrong here. They found him. Elwes, Dylan cried, prying open the door. They found Logan. 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 The word tumbled around in my head like a single item inside a dryer. Logan. They found him. What the fuck was going on? I stopped short, yanking my hand from my husband's, this man who looked like my husband anyway, but certainly wasn't acting like him. Dylan, stop. He stopped walking and blinked at me, confusion clouding his face. OSS, what's going on? Didn't you hear me? They found Logan. Why are you acting so strange? I bit down on my tongue, fighting the urge to unleash a series of swear words. I wasn't the one acting strange here. Why couldn't he see that? Who the fuck was Logan? Why were we even here? I took a deep, measured breath. Dylan, I don't know what's going on. I don't know who Logan is, and why the fuck we should care that they found him. My words were like a slap to the face. Dylan recoiled, a look of disgust coming over him. His eyes darkened and he leaned in close, murmuring to me, hot breath washing over my face. Please don't do this right now. Just come with me. I wanted to turn around and walk away, but I didn't. I should have. If these past 4 days have taught me anything, it's that following Dylan through that police station was the worst mistake I've ever made in my life. But something inside me told me to go with him. Curiosity, I guess. Wanting answers. The urgency in Dylan's demeanor. I should have fucking run. Fine, I said quietly. We took the elevator up to the second floor and pushed through a set of double doors to a reception area. Dylan approached an officer behind a desk. Mr. and Mrs. Harding here to see Detective Phillips, he said. The officer's face lit up. Yes, of course, he's waiting for you. You can head right back to his office. He pointed straight back through a maze of cubicles and Dylan motioned me forward. Dread snaked through me and my legs started to tremble as we walked. Officers in cubicles stopped to stare at us. One was even crying, wiping tears from her cheeks with a wad of tissues. What was with all the fucking dramatics? The office door swung open before we even got there, and a man in his mid-40s with a slight pot belly and a full beard grinned out at us. He's right in here, folks. Come, come. He's been waiting anxiously for you. He sounded so excited. It was almost contagious, until I remembered that there was nothing to be excited about. Whatever was going on was seriously fucked up. Dylan went first, stepping over the threshold and into the small office. I saw his body tense, then relax with a rush of breath. It really is you, he cried, his voice breaking. Elwesis, it's him. After all this time, our son has come home. I stepped timidly into the office. A boy, maybe 6 or 7, sat perched on a chair, his dark curly hair disheveled and standing up at odd angles on his head. He clutched a juice box in one hand and a ratty teddy bear in the other. He was pale, but his cheeks were unnaturally rosy, and he looked up at us with the darkest, widest eyes I've ever seen. Seeing him was like a gut punch. Fear coursed through me like an electric shock. This kid, whoever he was, definitely wasn't my son. In fact, I was pretty sure he was pure fucking evil. Story number 5. Lately, I've barely been able to keep my head above water financially. For the past 2 years, I've moved around chasing job listings and low rent. I've sank low enough to accept a door-to-door sale job. It had something to do with a water filter. I doubted the services were legit, but I got paid per sale. After 3 days of getting the door slammed in my face, I got desperate to head into a neighborhood with longer lawns and cracks in the sidewalk. I just needed one more sale, and I swore I would quit this awful job. The sun had started to set by the time I arrived at the last house on the block. I considered not bothering with it. One of the front windows was broken with nothing but cardboard keeping the insects out. I regret ever going up the wooden front steps to knock on the door. A few seconds passed of silence after my short knocks. I had turned to leave when the door opened a crack. Inside was too dark to see the man's face fully. I was so surprised someone actually answered, I fumbled with the papers in my hands. "What are you selling?" The man asked in a deep voice. "I'm with the Clear Waters filtration systems. If I could have a moment of your time, I would like to display how dirty your tap water is," I said, my voice as tired as I felt from being on my feet all day. The man didn't move for a few seconds. He kept looking over me, trying to see if I was a threat. Finally, he opened the door the rest of the way to let me inside. I paused, debating on how much I needed this sale. The fact I hadn't had a meal in 2 days was the factor that made me follow the owner of the house. Inside was dark and smelled musty. I expected it to be dirty, but there wasn't much inside. The old floorboards creaked as he led me to the kitchen. The room was almost bare. A table with 2 chairs took up most of the space. There was a full knife block, a microwave, and a fridge. No dishwasher, no plates or mugs, not even any trash. "May I have a cup of water to test?" I asked. My stomach turned. My body knew something was wrong before my brain caught up. The man was taller than me and well-built. He looked well-fed compared to my thinner frame. I wasn't always like this. Years ago, I was in shape, but not having reliable meals hit me hard. By the time I clued into my situation, it was far too late. I had already walked into a trap. Instead of getting a glass of water, the man took a step closer to me. I raised my clipboard as if they would protect me. He took me out with a single punch to the face. My body hit the ground hard, my nose bleeding. Panic started to set in. I shook my head, trying to clear my racing thoughts. I cursed the idea that I could have taken this guy in a fight a year ago and just how much I let myself go. His hands fell on me, causing me to struggle. I yelled as I kicked his legs. With some effort, he got me pinned down to the floor. He painfully pulled my arms behind my back. My wrists were held together with one hand as he used the other to slam my head on the ground hard enough to make my vision go black. In the few seconds I was out, he put a zip tie painfully around my wrists. I felt him lifting my body to my feet. I needed to do something. I jerked back out of his grasp to land hard against the counter. The knife block fell, causing a few of the blades to slide out. I grabbed a handle of one with my bound hands. I had a weapon, but no way to use it. A knock at the door made us both freeze. I almost screamed for help. A barrel of a gin pointing directly at my face made my mouth close. I let him force me into a chair, my hands still gripping the knife he hadn't noticed. The man didn't need to say anything. His eyes told me everything I needed to know. I watched as he walked out of the room towards the door to a new victim. I heard muffled words as I frantically got to work cutting at the zip tie. I sliced open my fingers, trying to use the knife. I felt the zip tie snap just as my attacker came back inside the room with someone new. I froze again. If I made a run for it, I would get shot. I needed to wait for the right moment to get the jump on this man, praying the element of surprise would beat his trigger finger. The new person had wavy black hair and a bright, dimpled smile on his face. His pressed white shirt and sharp dress pants looked out of place in a house like this. He held some booklets in his hand. My face dropped when I read the words, "The Watchtower," on the front. This poor guy was just trying to spread the good word, only to get caught up with all of this. His smile faltered when he saw my face. His eyes followed the blood from my nose to my now-stained shirt. "Is this a bad time? I can come back later." The newcomer spoke in a softer tone that matched his appearance. His face held a nervous smile. The man who led him inside again said nothing. When the newcomer moved to step away, he was caught in a flash. I winched at the sound of him hitting the table hard. The booklets spilled to the floor as the larger man pinned him down. "Please, I haven't seen anything. I won't." He started begging but got cut off. Just like myself, he had his wrists zip-tied together. When that was done, he was forced into the chair on the other end of the table, scared as hell. His entire body shook. I didn't blame him. My heart raced as I carefully waited for the right time to act. I can't believe how lucky I am. 2 products just knocked on my door. Here I thought I was only shipping one today. Now behave. You're worth more alive. Our kidnapper spoke as he ran a hand over his bald head. I saw the gun in the back of his waistband. I judged the distance between us. Would I have enough time to reach him before he pulled his gun? Or should I wait until he got closer? I didn't have the chance to think through my plan. The stress of the situation was too much for the other man. He bolted upwards, trying to escape. There was a quick struggle that ended in a single gunshot. I stared in horror as a body hit the floor. A pristine white shirt slowly started turning red with blood. I started to feel sick. My stomach turned over the simple fact that if I had acted sooner, this wouldn't have happened. I had a knife in my hand, and yet a man was now bleeding out on the floor in front of me. Like I said, you're worth more alive. The deep voice snapped me from my shock. Stepping over the body, the attacker took the 2 steps to my chair. The still hot muzzle of the gun was pressed to my cheek. I got dizzy from fear. My hands shook so badly that I nearly dropped the still hidden knife. "I'll make you a deal. Call 2 people over here and I'll let you go free," he offered as he brought his face closer to mine. I smelled his terrible breath. I started to pull my head away, but he grabbed a fistful of short hair to keep me still. I stammered. I was going to tell the truth, that I truly didn't have anyone in my life I could call. Even if I did, he would just shoot them? For what purpose? Who would pay for dead bodies? Wasn't this all too risky? In the back of my mind, I knew the answer. One so gruesome, I didn't dare consider it until the black-haired man on the floor moved. Our eyes met mine. Then his mouth formed a smile that made my body turn cold. "Oh, come on. No one? A handsome guy like yourself must have a girlfriend. What about a relative or 2 you don't like?" the man said in a mocking tone. I wasn't fully listening to him. As he spoke, the person I was positive had been shot dead started to silently move. The kidnapper's face was so focused on mine that he didn't notice what was happening right behind him. "Turn around," I hissed. "I'm not falling for that," he replied, his face dropping in anger. I felt his hands start looking through my pockets for my phone. I shook my head, pleading for this man to just look over his shoulder. I no longer needed the knife for him. It would be best to save it for what came next. "Turn the hell around," I snapped again. "There's nothing, he yelled as he finally listened to my warning. He moved to be face to face with the man he just shot. I watched in disbelief as the thing I assumed to be a person got on all 4s to climb up the table, not making a sound. It easily scaled the wall to stand on the ceiling as if that was normal. A wide, dimpled smile appeared on his face when the bald man finally saw what he invited into his house. To his credit, the man raised the gun faster than expected. His wrist was caught and snapped in one fluid motion. His cry of pain was cut short. He was swiftly tossed across the room, denting the cheap drywall on the other side. I caught the eyes of the monster before me. He gave a wink before jumping down from the ceiling. "Sit tight," he said in a gentle voice I didn't trust. I needed to run. If this monster was focused on the other man, I had a chance to get away. I looked down at the blood-stained floor, also covered in religious pamphlets. WWJD had been written on the top of one of them. My face twitched into an annoyed smile for a second. I hated what I got myself into. I watched as the bald man got hauled back to his feet. His wrist was bruised and swollen, his head bleeding from going through the drywall. His body was forced into a chair by the strength of the false Jehovah's Witnesses. The chair was spun around so they were face to face. I gripped the knife tighter, waiting for whatever horrors I may see shortly. You were saying we were products. Who's your buyer? Is it Mr. Shark? Or something else? The dark-haired man asked in a forced kind voice. He pinned down the other man's wrists to the chair. When that didn't fully work, he forced a knee into his stomach. Fuck you. If the seller ratted out his buyer, he would be placing a target on his back. If he didn't give up the information now, he would be tortured. Spilling what he knew saved him a great deal of pain. However, his pride wouldn't allow it. For a moment, I thought they were at a stalemate. But monsters have a way of making people talk. A small tube with a point at the end came out of the dark-haired man's mouth. I jumped when it shot out directly into the corner of the bald man's eye. He let out a cut-off scream, then his body froze into place. When the tube slid out, only a small amount of blood trickled down his cheek. I saw the sheer terror in his frozen expression. Whatever this creature did, it made it impossible for him to fight back. We could have done this the easy way. Actually, so far, you've made my job very easy by letting me inside. Your greed made you take risks. Your gun gave you confidence. Such a shame you won't be able to learn from your mistakes. I expected this monster to sound cruel, but he used the same voice as he did when he first walked into the room. The fact he sounded so normal made my skin crawl. He raised both hands beside the bald head. His index fingers suddenly transformed into sharp, curved claws that reminded me of insect legs. He placed the tip of a finger on the back of the man's head, slowly tracing a circle that connected in the front. If I had eaten recently, I would have thrown up at the sight of the top part of this person's head cleanly being lifted off, showing an exposed brain slowly pulsing. If I was a stronger person, I would have attacked the creature while it was distracted. Instead, I shut my eyes tight when the face of the monster in front of me changed. It went from a dimpled smile to a face opening into 4 segments. I didn't get a good enough look at it to see just how terrible this monster really was, but I heard some of it. The awful noises of a terrible mouth gorging on a gruesome meal. I didn't know how long I kept my eyes closed. Could have been minutes or an hour. There was a chance that because I wasn't a target, this creature may let me leave unharmed. I should have begged for my life to get that slim chance of walking away. I did something stupid. I decided the world didn't need a monster like this one, and I needed to do something about it. I felt a hand fall on my shoulder. In a flash, I brought down the knife into this creature's neck. His face returned to normal. An offended expression appeared on his face. "Ow," he said without any pain in his voice. At least I caught him slightly off guard. I stood up, grabbing his hand. He was confused enough to not shake out of my grasp long enough to let me do what I wanted. A burning sensation came from our hands. It jolted him enough to toss me into the counter. I expected that. I was now within reach of the knives and the only weapon in the room. If I went for them to start with, he would have stopped me. I needed to make him push me over here. My vision became blurry from stress and my empty stomach. I forced myself to move. In a second, he covered the distance between us. My goal was to cut off his head. Most creatures couldn't live after being decapitated. The knives were good enough to cut through bone. I needed to put extra power into them. Power my weak body didn't have. Within seconds, my attack failed. I'd gotten a few more knives into his body, but he had me by the throat. My vision fading and my body weak. I saw his face open, ready for another meal. A loud thump from upstairs made him pause. His face returned to a human one. His grip lessened enough for me to breathe but not escape. He said 3 products, right? Let's go see who the third person is. The monster said, his dimpled smile returning. I didn't have the strength to fight him. I struggled in vain as he dragged me up the stairs to the bedroom where the noise came from. Again, I was tossed aside as he walked over to the shaking closet door. My legs buckled as I stood up. I needed to find a weapon, anything to stop him. I refused to give this monster one more meal. My heart dropped when small feet rushed out of the closet when the door opened. A child, no more than 4, attached themselves to the man's leg, crying for their father. My mouth became dry as he reached down to pick the child up, looking over the dirty, tear-stained face. I had to do something. As I looked around in the empty room for something useful, something unthinkable happened. The poor child wrapped small arms around the man's neck and started to sob. Carefully, he raised his hands to better support the tiny body. His head slowly turned to let his eyes meet mine. My mouth slightly fell open at his expression. I swear I saw stars in his eyes. At first, I assumed his favorite meal was tender children's flesh, but it dawned on me that wasn't the case. It's so cute. The tension in my body drains after those words. I fell to the floor, exhausted in more ways than one. If you try to hurt this kid, I'll kill you, I warned, even though I knew that wouldn't happen. Go find some soap. We'll get this thing washed up and I'll explain a few things, he offered. I wasn't expecting that. I refused to leave him alone with the child. Thankfully, we found some dish soap in the bathroom. It would be good enough. I watched as the same creature who had a moment before eaten a man's brains from his skull gently washed off a poor boy's face and arms. Since we didn't have any clean clothing, he just washed any exposed skin. The kindness was enough to soothe the boy. The moment he was dried off, he fell asleep in the man's arms. I offered to hold the boy but got a scowl in response. Instead, I was handed a phone with the instructions to call the only number in the contacts list. A woman answered and I requested that she show up at the address the owner of the phone had been directed to go. I take it if you've dealt with supernatural creatures before, he said after the phone call. I nodded but didn't tell him anything else. You pulled a bit of magic from my hand. Most humans can't do that. If you took better care of yourself, you might have given me some trouble. You should leave before my handler gets here. Again, I stayed silent on my history with creatures. I wanted to focus on who he was and what he was doing here. I don't fully trust you'll eat the kid the moment I'm out of the room, I answered back, arms crossed. He looked me over, then started to undo the buttons of his collar. A black tattoo encircled his neck. I've seen this before and knew what it was. I'm on a leash. I can't harm anyone that isn't related to my job. There has been a ring of human traffickers lately. They're selling humans to supernatural creatures for all sorts of reasons. I'm tracking down the sellers, not the products, he explained. You were going to eat me, I pointed out. It was self-defense. You attacked me first, he said with a smug look on his face. I hated dealing with monsters for this reason. An old friend of mine said all supernatural creatures would make great lawyers. They all twisted words enough to give enough doubt to make their point seem valid. Nothing good ever came from talking with monsters, let alone trying to make a deal with them. Someone came inside the house. A woman stormed up the stairs looking for the troublesome creature she had the job of looking after. She was beautiful, but in a manufactured way. I bet it took her 2 hours each morning to get her makeup and hair just right. Through her rage, she didn't notice the reason why we called her at first. August, you better have a damn good reason for. Oh my God, what do you have? She rushed over, hands out to take the boy from his arms. The monster refused for a moment, then carefully handed over the precious bundle. When his hands were free, his face dropped, and he made a distressed squeaking sound. Who are you? She asked, finally seeing the other person in the room. Innocent bystander, I commented with a shrug. Shit, well, supernatural creatures are dash, she started, and I waved her off. I'm a retired contract worker. I know all about monsters and such. Is the kid going to be okay? She breathed a sigh of relief over not having to explain monsters to a normal person. Yes, we'll get in contact with the family. If he comes from a bad environment, we'll find the right home for him. Here's my card if you want any kind of follow-up. Did August attack you? You're bleeding. I rubbed my nose, only then realizing how bad I looked. I took the offered card but knew I wanted to just put this all behind me. I did no such thing. I'm on a leash. August, the monster said with his arms crossed. Fuck off. We all know you're a little shit that causes problems. She growled back at him. It was self-defense. He added with a grin that made me want to punch him. Don't worry about it. I'll leave you guys to your work. Just make sure the kid is taken care of. I went to leave, but the woman was nice enough to offer to get me home. A few minutes later, I found myself in my small apartment. my body sore, and my only good shirt ruined by blood. I collapsed into bed, never wanting to deal with supernatural creatures again. I added a door-to-door salesman to the list of jobs I refused to do. A few days later, I found myself staring at my phone. An email had come through saying I was paid for assisting in the human trafficking job. It was enough to cover my rent for 1 more month. But I was confused about why that monster would share the payment. Did his handler send me something because she felt bad I got dragged into that mess? Or was it August? I didn't know much about him, but he seemed like the type to not care about money. Giving it away was easier than thinking about how to spend it. I had other emails in my inbox. I quit hunting down monsters 2 years ago, but I still got the job requests from time to time. If I started back up again, I would only have to worry about my life, not my rent. I put my phone away, shaking my head. No matter what, I refused to go back to that life. Working in customer service was slightly less stressful. Story number 6. I'm a contract worker for a secret corporation that hunts supernatural creatures, not a walk in the park. Bit by bit, my living situation had improved. I could afford heat, at least 2 meals a day, and warm socks. Those comforts came at a cost. A bullet wound in my shoulder was still healing up. The company I worked for offered magic-laced medicine that could heal wounds faster, but they cost more than I could afford. Better to let things heal on their own. A deep ache from my legs bothered me. It got to the point that I knew I needed to get a checkup before working again. I hated needing to see the doctor for old wounds simply because medical costs aren't cheap. After this checkup, I might not be able to afford heat for the rest of the colder seasons this year. I wasn't certain what sort of creature Dr. Philo was. He looked human enough. I called to see if he had any open times for an appointment, but he told me he could swing by in a few hours. He was very busy treating supernatural creatures and sometimes humans like myself. He was always on the move, so it was easier to see him outside his clinic. He's been by my place 3 times in the past 2 years when my legs got too bad to deal with. The scar above the right knee looked redder than normal. My knee also felt weird. It made an unnatural creaking sound and sometimes popped out of place if I pushed myself too hard. My left leg needed to be wrapped with a special cloth. It had turned black, the darkness fading around my hip. I hated looking at the scars. I should be thankful that I was able to get my legs back, but they were a constant reminder of the day I lost the person I cared about most. Dr. Philo arrived with a few months' supply of cloth for the left leg. He needed to redo some painful spell work because the magic that kept my leg attached had been weakening. When I pulled magic from other sources through my body while on the job, it had messed with the spell that attached new flesh to old. "I hear you've been working again," he said after the treatments were finished. He often stayed for a few minutes to chat and get caught up. I always offered him a drink or a snack, but he refused, saying he didn't like sweet things or like tea. Once he accepted a cup of coffee. He wore a mask over half his face and sounded as if he always had a sore throat. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen his full face before. He adjusted large glasses over top of his mask and brushed aside light brown hair. I needed the money. I figured it was about time. I can't seem to get any easy jobs, though. I shrugged. My legs hurt like hell. I dreaded the idea of staying in bed for a few more days to recover. I needed to get a job soon to pay for this treatment. Don't push yourself too hard. Paying off your debts is not worth your life. Have you found anyone to support you? He asked, looking around my barren and run-down apartment. No, I figured I needed to get myself back together before I dragged a person into my mess. And with scars like these, it's not as if I'll find someone who would be interested in a simple fling either. No friends? Nothing of the sort. He offered, almost sounding worried about me. I shrugged again. I was about to tell him that August offered to work with me whenever he was free. I didn't feel like boring him with my personal life, or lack of one. Go make some friends. Get some rest. Call me if your pain increases, he said as he stood up ready to leave. This was all the advice I'd heard before. I paid what I could, then mentally flinched when I saw the rest of the amount I still owed. I promised I would take it easy as the doctor left to see another one of his patients. I did plan on staying in bed and resting for as long as I needed. However, 2 days later, I found myself sitting on a bench in a park 10 minutes away from my apartment. A job came in saying a handful of people saw some sort of large animal and a young girl had gone missing shortly after the sightings. It wasn't confirmed a creature had been behind these events, but the corporation didn't like taking chances. The park was so nearby, I figured I would check it out. I walked over during the day looking for any kind of clues. The park led off into a short nature trail. I assumed if there was a creature, it would hang out in the trees. An entire day of searching led to nothing. Since monsters came out at night, I was stuck staying up late. Aside from some recent graffiti, nothing appeared out of place around the park or the trail. My legs ached from all the walking. I spent a few hours sitting on a bench, almost wanting for something to happen. I found out the hard way, if I focused hard way, not use my talent of seeing traces of magic after my leg treatments. The migraines I got did not mix well with the leg pain, making them both unbearable. Speaking of something unbearable, my phone kept going off because August figured out how to send gifs. I should have blocked him. He would on occasion send a good cat gif in the mess of other memes that made it worth letting his messages go through. Is your girlfriend worried about you? A voice made me jump. A girl had silently walked behind the bench to see over my shoulder. She had gotten a glimpse of the random messages. I stood up to face her, honestly expecting a monster. Instead, I found a petite, dark-haired girl wearing a plain white dress. She even had sandals in this cold weather. She had her hands behind her back. Healing bruises spotted her arms. She looked anywhere between 16 and 19. She shouldn't be out in a dark park at this hour without a coat. I put my phone and wallet in my pants pocket, then took off my jacket. I offered it to her without hesitation. Where do you live? Do you need help getting home? I offered. She smiled in a way that looked very familiar. Her black hair and dimples made me think of August. She took my jacket, snuggling down into the warm collar for a moment. I'm not normally the kind of girl who lets strange men take me home, she joked in an overly sweet voice. I'll call you a cab, I said, not wanting her to get any ideas. By chance, do you have any siblings? I added. She shook her head, confused over the odd question. No. Are you disappointed I don't have a sister? She suggested. It was as if she was trying to flirt. She was very bad at it if that was her goal. No, you look like a friend of mine. Must just be the hairstyle. Now come on, let's call a ride for you. The smile on her face appeared forced. I wasn't going along with the game she wanted to play. I started to walk down the pathway towards the park entrance with her following behind. My phone didn't want to turn on again. Sometimes it shut off in the colder weather. What are you doing out at this time of night? I asked her as we walked. Looking for monsters. How about you? She said, her sweet tone dropping slightly. I froze. Carefully, I turned my head towards her, my brain trying to work out if she was a threat. Some creatures looked like innocent, weak humans to lure in their meals. She may be a monster ready to rip my heart out, or just a weird girl in the park because she had an interest in the occult. If I made a run for it, I risked leaving a poor girl stranded. If I didn't leave, then I also risked getting eaten. I wasn't aware of how right I was about the risk of being dinner for a creature. A burst of wind came down on us. I started to move to grab the odd girl to get her out of danger. My body was too slow. To my horror, a beast came down from the sky. In one lightning-fast movement, a black beak scooped her up around the waist. In 2 beats of its wings, it lifted back into the sky, tossing her into the air. Her small body was swallowed whole by the monster that recently started to stalk the park. It was a crow the size of a car with 3 glowing red eyes, but oddly enough, paws as legs. Like hell, I was gonna let her get eaten like that. We stopped near a bench. I prayed I had enough strength to fight back in time to save her. Every living thing had magic. The amount depended on many different factors. I was in the middle of a park with countless plants, trees, and dormant insects, all with their own life force. That magic leaked into the air. It was a reason why some forests felt so strange to humans. If you knew how you could ask to use the power nature held. Humans weren't built to handle magic. I still made a silent request to everything around me. I put out my will to take whatever was given. I then grabbed a hold of the bench that had been bolted down into the stone walkway. A burst of power came through. I aimed for the glowing eyes in the sky and threw the bench as hard as I could towards it. The metal and wood found its target. I heard the impact and saw the crow fall from the sky, screeching the entire way down. The backlash of using so much magic hit hard. My right knee popped out and I swore it felt as if it was going to come apart at the old scars. My arms burst with pain and my muscles cramped up. Each one of my hands curled uselessly. I forced myself forward towards the downed crow, hoping it wasn't too late to save the poor girl. I was in no condition to fight the monster if the bench flying into its face didn't knock it out. By sheer luck, the crow was still. My luck turned around in seconds when an even larger crow landed behind me. I screamed into the night, red eyes angrily glowing. Well, shit. I frantically ran through my brain trying to figure out what the hell these creatures were. If you knew enough about a monster, there was a chance you could defeat it even if you were weaker. Nothing came to mind. Not a damn thing. I've heard of bad omen crows. They were oversized crows that appeared near cursed humans with bad luck to feed off of. Aside from that, no clue on how to kill them. Give me a damn break, I said to any higher power that might be listening. Again, my luck turned around in a way I never would have guessed. The larger crow let out a noise over something that was happening behind me. The knocked-out bird's eyes flew open as its chest feathers budged outwards. It let out a strangled cry, then rolled on its back. My body felt cold when I saw a human shape literally rip its way through flesh, blood, and feathers. The girl stood covered in gore, her once white dress clinging to her, and my jacket was ruined. Sharp claws hung at her side. A wide smile cracked her face in half. She shook the hair from her hair and then grabbed her blood-soaked clothing. She ripped it off to stand in the cold, wearing nothing but a sports bra and shorts. The larger crow started to move, knowing it wasn't wise to stick around. She didn't give it time to flee. Within seconds, she was on the monster 10 times her size. Claws and teeth ripping deep into the monster's body. I should have stayed home that night. I took a few steps away, the pain slowing my movements. If I was lucky, I had enough time to get out of the park before she finished the one-sided fight. I'm never lucky. She tackled me from behind, easily knocking us bother over. I rolled on my back, ready to fight back. She quickly pinned down my arms, blood dripping from her stained face. Come on, darling. Show me what you can do. You knocked down that chicken, didn't you? What else do you have up your sleeve? She said, her voice now lacking the fact sweetness she used before. She was crazy. Legit a nutcase. I've come across monsters that love nothing but fighting. She had acted as bait, not to lure in humans to eat, but for other monsters. Since I showed a hint of skill, I was now the next target. This wasn't good. She took down the 2 crows in under 2 minutes. I couldn't fight my way out of this, and by the look in her eyes, I couldn't talk my way out of this either. How about you let go so we're on even terms? I suggested, praying to buy some more time. She let out a shrill laugh as if I told her the funniest joke in the world. Fight for it, she shouted. Her dimpled smile no longer appeared charming. I ran through my options. I used every ounce of strength to pull my hands free. I slipped one wrist through her fingers because of the blood on her hands. She was covered with it. Something caught my eye. Dark patches on her neck showed through the deep red. I realized she had a black ring tattoo she had hidden under some sort of makeup. The fighting and wetness had rubbed parts of it away. With one hand free and seconds to act, I reached out to grab hold of her neck. A burst of magic came from the spell that kept her leashed. She screamed, showing off all her sharp teeth. Her nails dug into my wrists, but I pushed forward. I couldn't break this collar like I had with the bat monster. I could only force through one command. It hurt the both of us. White sparks of magic flew out into the grass, creating deep holes where it landed. She mentally begged me to stop what I was doing, and yet I still pushed. I fought with everything to let that one request sink into the spell. Something clicked between us, and I finally pulled back. She scrambled away on all fours, hissing like a cat. I stayed on the ground, barely able to breathe. My hands smoked from touching so much raw magic for so long. If she wanted to finish me off, she could have. What in God's name is going on here? A man's voice came as a flashlight beam landed on us. A set of police stood shell-shocked at what they saw in the park. 2 dead birds, me and the girl who barely appeared human. I groaned, hating dealing with cops. There were always so many awkward conversations and paperwork afterward. Any money the corporation may have paid for 2 monster crows to be killed would be directed elsewhere. Cover-ups cost money after all. April! Another voice came. I knew who was running up the pathway. She saw me and gasped. The cops refused to let her get closer, which I understood. They didn't know what was going on or if the hissing blood-covered woman was dangerous. What a coincidence! I said in a shaken voice and raised my good hand to wave at Evie. She worked as August's handler. It made sense she knew more creatures on a leash. If the girl who wanted to kill me wasn't one of them, she would know who her boss was. As it turns out, Evie was the nearest handler. When she heard the cops get called to the same park April said she was going, her handler asked Evie to go check in just in case. She later told me she dealt with April so often that she might as well be her official contract worker. I let Evie get things sorted with the cops. Just as I thought, there was going to be a lot of paperwork. Soon the cleanup crew arrived to collect the bodies of the crows and to do basic medical treatments for us. April was fine. Evie and she got along well. I saw her fussing over the smaller girl as if April was a younger sister. Finally, they made their way over to where I was sitting. "Say you're sorry for trying to kill him," Evie demanded in a stern voice. "Sorry for trying to eat your brains." April said not sorry at all. "You wanted to eat my brains?" I answered, moving slightly further away from the pair. "Not wanted. I was going to. Not now, though. I don't eat the brains of my friends, human or not," April said, and it made my face flush. "Friends? How? When?" Evie questioned, shocked over the development. April gave a tooth-filled smile, and I wanted to die. She should have just eaten me. This human messed with my collar. He could have written anything into the spell. An order to not kill him or for me to kill myself. Anything. And you know what he said? "Let's be friends." Yeah, I wanted to die. Evie stared at me as if I was on the same mental level as April. She carefully took hold of the other girl, who now was wrapped in a blanket one of the cleanup crews brought. "Just friends?" She asked, very weary of my motives. "Just friends." She's like, "A kid." I defended myself. "Oh, so we're grooming supernatural girls now?" Evie replied, hugged April tighter. "I'm too tired to be offended. If you think that's the case, you're free to keep her away from me forever." I may have forced the idea of being friends into the collar that keeps her under control, but she doesn't need to listen to that request if she doesn't want to. I tried to stand up to start going home, but my legs refused to work. I collapsed back onto the bench, too drained to move. "You're not ditching me that easily. You made a friend offer, so you can't back out now, sucker. For now, I want to eat some of that big-ass chicken. Leave your number with Evie. We'll hang." April was released so she could run over to one of the crow's bodies. She tore a good few mouthfuls off before the cleanup crew started chasing her off with threats of getting power washed. "I was just teasing you," Evie admitted. "April is a handful. She'll be hard to deal with if she decides to stick with this offer of friendship. It was either that or dead. I am currently weighing my options. Why was there no such thing as an easy job? I couldn't get home on my own." Evie requested the help of the very confused cops who stuck around. They drove me home and pressed me for some answers. I promised them things would be explained by someone else. I was not in the state for a long conversation. I got let off the hook and collapsed into bed without changing my clothing. I ended the night not making a dime from the job. I needed to ask Dr. Philo back to reset my legs again because of the beating they took from the burst of magic I borrowed. Financial setbacks were better than dead. Sometimes only barely better than dead. Story number 7. The Wendigo tapes. It was late when we pulled up to the cabin. The headlights of our Suburban reflected off the darkened windows, briefly shining on the ominous trees that surrounded us. It had been a long driver, and the change in altitude was taking its toll. My parents were normally pretty lively, but I could tell they were beginning to get on each other's nerves. They never bickered, at least in front of us, but they were usually quiet. A slight drizzle started in the night sky, and we all jumped out of the SUV while grabbing our bags. Dad went straight for the cabin while we quickly made our way behind him. Inside, the new cabin was picture perfect. just like the AD said on Airbnb. It was more luxurious than rustic, but we preferred it that way. Normally, we would have stayed at the family cabin on my mom's side, but the forest fires over the summer had finally taken their toll. We were disappointed, but it was only a matter of time, and we knew that however this didn't help with our adjusting to the new place we were renting. Paintings of landscapes and majestic animals lined the walls, making this almost obnoxious, but that was probably me just being overcritical. The week at the cabin was always a treat everyone looked forward to. It was one of the few things that my family did religiously every year aside from maybe church on Christmas. My brother and I scoured the cabin for our rooms. I ended up taking the loft, which sat in the nook of the A-frame that looked down into the rest of the cabin. Updated carpet as well as log-styled furniture filled the room. In the corner was a dated TV with one of those VCRs built in, but nothing else around it. The walls were designed like logs. The roof angled somewhat sharply, and facing out the rear was a large window. I was able to look out and see the forest that seemed to engulf us. The moon was playing its part in adding a slightly eerie vibe, casting shadows amidst its pale light. I laid my stuff on the bed and glanced out, taking in the breathtaking sight. I turned to put my stuff away and noticed a small door outlined on the log-styled wall. It had a small brass knob that barely stuck out and blended in almost perfectly had it not been for the obnoxious lock that kept it closed. The lock looked old. The opening on it appeared worn, and the key must have been equally large and awkward. Everything in this cabin seemed new, or at least updated aside from the TV in the corner, so it was strange to see something so out of place. I put my things away, paid the random small door no mind. Not much later, my mother called us from the living room, and we all slowly gathered from our separate areas. "I don't know about you guys, but I am very hungry. Does anyone want to come with me to get food to bring back here?" she asked. Seeing how this cabin didn't have Wi-Fi and we were virtually off the grid, I volunteered. My brother and dad were either too tired or not hungry enough to care, so we made it a girls' trip back into town. "So how do you like the cabin so far?" Mom asked as we got buckled in the SUV. "I mean, I like our old cabin, but this one is slightly nicer. It's newer, but I wish it had Wi-Fi or at least a real TV," I said, trying not to complain. "Yeah, the old cabin was nice. It was much closer, but we got a screaming deal on this one. It's probably because it's in the middle of nowhere, but I guess that's the point." We drove out of the woods and back onto the road, leading us into Gavin County. The radio softly played some kind of country music, and Mom went over the plans for the week, most of which were things not taking place at the actual cabin itself. We drove on the empty road, occasionally passing another vehicle, undoubtedly another poor family being forced to spend time together, I thought. The thing I liked about the old cabin was that there were other cabins nearby, some of which we were even friends, but out here, out in the middle of the woods, I felt so incredibly isolated. We drove down to town where the half-dozen lights of whatever businesses that were still open glowed faintly. I feel like most small towns seem to have a Chinese place, which, unfortunately, this one didn't. But like every small town, it did have a gas station, a pawn shop, and an outdated post office, all of which were closed. There was one diner, however, that still seemed to be open. It had a few cars parked out front, which we ended up pulling into considering we had no other options in town. The diner almost seemed to have a 70s style to it, but that probably wasn't on purpose. We walked inside, and low commotion could be heard in the fairly empty diner. An older gentleman standing behind the counter gave a brief smile and nodded to a booth. "Hope y'all are hungry," he said. "Indeed we are," Mom replied. We sat down and ordered. The man we assumed to be our waiter didn't write anything down, just nodded after each thing. "They'll get that ready for ya. Right quick," he said, ducking back into the kitchen. We were both tired and worst of all hungry. A moment of appreciated silence fell between us. I could tell my mom was thinking of something to say to start a conversation, but the man returned too quickly with our food. "Y'all are from out of state?" he asked while placing our orders in front of us. My mom was taken aback. "Oh no, is it that obvious?" "It's not obvious." He smiled. "I saw your plates when you pulled in. So what brings you here?" My mom laughed. "Yeah, we are just getting away from it all. Our family cabin burnt down last summer, so we decided to try something different." "That's too bad," he said. The man turned to leave before my mom awkwardly asked, "Any fun hikes here in town?" trying to make the best of our situation. The man walked back over to our table while scratching his chin. Fun hikes. Huh? Well, we don't do a lot of hiking around here. Isn't safe unless you're packing a firearm of some kind. Lots of bears and other things lurking around. This is more of a place you just drive through. He paused. We do have the Horseshoe Museum, though, which I don't recommend. He chuckled. Sorry, not much going on here. My mom's attempt to cheer me up failed miserably. Dang. I'm sure we will find something, Mom replied. I hope you find it before it finds you, the man said before dipping away to the kitchen. Why are old people so creepy? I whispered. Oh, he was just having fun with us tourists. Plus, that's how old people talk. We ate our meal and the man came by once or twice to fill our drinks. Both times he was silent, just smiled. We paid our bill and walked out to the SUV. The drive back to the cabin was no less eerie than the first time. The dark trees lined both sides of the road, begging the question what else lurked inside. We made it back to the cabin around midnight. Time had gotten away from us. My dad and brother had gone to bed, but I could still hear noise coming from Eric's room. He was probably playing on his Switch or something. I went upstairs to the loft and got ready for bed. The loft was nice, but there weren't any blinds on the large window. It wasn't so much an issue because who would have seen me, but it was weird being able to look out into the vast woods, unsure of what was looking back. The next morning, I woke to the warm sun slowly rising through the trees. It was earlier than what time I would have normally gotten up, but the light slowly creeping in made it impossible to go back to bed. I went downstairs to the kitchen to find my brother already awake. He was just sitting in the living room playing more on his Switch. Is anyone else up? I asked, still whipping the sleep from my eyes. He glanced up briefly. Doesn't look like it, he said before returning to his game. Good call, bro, I said, working my way over to the fridge. At the old family cabin, we normally kept the fridge stocked, but at this one it had slipped our minds to bring food. The fridge was empty. I wasn't starving, but I would need to get food soon. They'll just wait for Mom and Dad to get up, I thought. In the meantime, I racked my brain on what to do. I went back upstairs and got dressed for a hike. I wasn't an outdoorsy girl by any means, but I did love a good walk. The sun and all its glory was peering in stronger now. I went downstairs and outside. The morning air was brisk but fresh with the smell of damp leaves. The cabin's exterior was neatly landscaped. A stone path led around to the back, which I slowly went on as I stretched. Around back was more of the same. Stones were placed neatly guiding me to the woods, undoubtedly leading me to a trail. I followed the stone path out into the woods, and the neatly placed stones eventually stopped at a basic dirt path. One much less cared for. A quick 20-minute walk couldn't hurt. I always had a rule that the second I couldn't see a path, I would stop and turn around. No sense in getting lost in woods I was unfamiliar with. Plus, knowing my brother, he would probably forget to tell my parents I went for a walk. I walked a good 5 minutes when I remembered the conversation from last night. The old man at the diner recommended I have a gun when going into the woods. I stopped in my tracks. Ah, that's right, I sighed, totally unprepared if something were to happen. But then I remembered what my mom said. He was just giving us tourists a hard time. I debated briefly before continuing my hike. I continued my walking for another 20 minutes or so. Not only did the trail eventually end, but at the end of it was a weird sight. It was barely visible, but sitting just off to the left of the trail down a little ways appeared to be an old concrete structure. I like to discover things, sure, but I also knew better than to investigate a strange building out in the middle of the woods, at least by myself. Had Eric ever stopped playing Zelda, or I had one of my parents, I would have peeked inside, but being a young girl alone in the woods, no chance. That was until I noticed how dilapidated it was. I could almost see all of it from the outside. It was more of a frame of a large shed than anything. There wouldn't be much to investigate, as it looked more dangerous from a structural standpoint rather than some villainous hideout. The unassuming structure spoke to me, drawing me in like a wounded puppy needing attention. I stepped off the path. I can take a quick peek, I guess, I thought to myself. The hollow shed was only just a few hundred feet away from the trail. I would have to be severely disoriented to not find it again. The odds of the menacing bears that lurked in the woods were staying inside were incredibly small. A concrete frame stood, mostly eroded, and whatever remnants of the roof had been removed a long time ago, if ever existing at all. There were window frames, but no glass. As I got closer, I noticed a very strange sight. More so that the shed itself. Hanging on a rusted nail just outside the doorway was a large key. But to add to the mystery of this key was the weirdest thing dangling off of a chain connected to it. The best way to describe it was that it appeared to be a rabbit's foot, but the trinket didn't have any fur. The nasty-looking bone protruded out of one end and came to a point much like that of a talon or a claw. I didn't have a reason, but I picked up the key. Its weight was rather impressive for such a small item. I tried not to touch the gross-looking keychain on the other end. I was going to put it back, but something caught my eye. Inside the concrete frame in the center of the floor was a metal hatch. The hatch itself was rusted and looked incredibly heavy. To my dismay, it was open and sat back at about 160 degrees, not quite touching the other side. I froze in horror. Two things immediately came to realization as I saw drag marks leading down and into the hatch, but also scratch marks on the inside portion of the hatch. I knew immediately that this wasn't a place I should be. Something incredible sinister was taking place here, but I couldn't be sure what it was. Not the slightest spark of courage or curiosity came forth. If anything, I was repelled by the sight. That was enough for today. The shock of seeing the strange bunker and insidious signs of foul play. I slipped the key into my pocket and backpedaled away from the concrete structure. I didn't want to take my eyes off the hatch for fear of whatever lurked beneath sprung forth and dragging me down into the endless abyss below. I quickly found the trail, my nerves slowly calming down the further I got away from the cryptic hatch. I made my way back to the cabin. My mind wondered what mysteries were held beneath the metal hatch. A makeshift meth lab, a well, a bunker someone tried to build and deserted halfway through? My hunger was getting the better of me. My parents had better have been awake by now. It didn't take long for the cabin to slowly come back into view. I could see my room, aka the loft, a good distance away. Creepy to think someone could very well be able to see me and I would have no idea. I made it back to the cabin and was delighted to see my dad cooking eggs in the kitchen. Eric was still a couch potato and didn't seem to have even moved from last time I saw him. I could hear Mom singing from her bedroom, still getting ready for the day. "Hey, Kay," Dad said, glancing up briefly from the eggs. I smiled. "Hey, Dad, making some for me?" I asked hopefully. I wasn't, but I can," he said. "That would be amazing. So how was your walk?" Dad asked. "It was actually really good. I didn't see any bears, and there's a nice little path that leads pretty good out in the woods." I don't know why, but I debated on telling him about the hatch. Like mentioning it would have caused a negative consequence or something. I didn't mention the hatch, but I mentioned the structure. That way I had some form of deniability of going close to it. "I saw a little spooky shed building out in the woods I might check out later." My dad nodded. "Oh, sounds like a little family activity for later." Before I could respond, Eric shouted from the couch, "That sounds lame. We need to go to a lake like our last cabin." My dad and I shared a silent moment of judging Eric before dishing me up some eggs. By this time, my mom exited her room wearing workout clothes. "Did I hear something about a hike?" she asked. "Yeah, Kay said there was a little trail out back." I interrupted. "And there weren't any bears," I said, smiling. Mom smiled. "Oh, right. The creepy old guy from the dinner," she chuckled. "Well, I am ready. What about you, Stephen?" Mom said, looking at my dad. "Oh, right now," he assured. Dad said, somewhat off guard. "Kay, hike round 2? Check out the spooky shed." I glanced up from my eggs mid-chew. "You know, cool parents only hike it is. See you guys in a bit." My parents left the cabin and I finished breakfast before heading upstairs. I could see my parents through the window outside as they ventured deeper into the woods. The hike I went on didn't result in any sweat, so I stayed in my workout clothes. Out of the corner of my eye, the large out-of-place padlock caught my attention. I turned my head slightly and saw the outline of the door that blended in so well. Weird. I looked at the lock for a brief moment before an idea slowly came into my mind. It took me longer than it should have, but I finally realized that the lock looked to be of the same material as the skeleton key I found earlier out in the woods. I pulled the key from my pocket and felt the weight of the cold metal. The grotesque keychain dangled lifelessly, causing my skins to crawl. Ugh. I have to get rid of that. I walked over to the door and knelt down. I didn't even have the key in the lock before my heart began to race. It was as if I knew this would work. I inserted the key with odd smoothness and gave it a twist. A heavy click could be heard, and to my satisfaction, the lock clicked open. Whoa! I whispered. I pulled hard on the door, which caught on part of the carpet. It was clear that whoever renovated this place didn't plan on anyone opening this door. I pulled harder, pushing my foot against the wall for more leverage, but the door only opened a few inches. Damn, the hard part of finding the key was done. I just had to open the damn thing. I pulled harder but was only rewarded with a slight opening of a couple inches. I peered inside what little I could open but was disappointed in not having a clear view. I stuck my arm inside, reaching around for anything, and to my surprise, I felt an opened cardboard box. It was heavy, but I pulled it towards the door. I couldn't pull the box through the door, but once I pulled it closer, I was able to reach inside. I started pulling random objects out of the box and through the small door. To my surprise, I started pulling videotapes that were old and had written labels on them. Some of the labels had titles or dates, much like any home movie a family would have made. All of the titles seemed inconspicuous, like Family Vacation 1 or Grandma and Grandpa Visit. Ha! I fished around more and ended up finding about 9 tapes in total. The tapes that had the dates told me these must have been filmed decades ago, sometime in the early 80s. Seeing how I was bored out of my mind, I picked up the tapes and took them over to the old TV that sat in the corner of the loft. I was fully expecting to be disappointed in that the TV was probably not going to work, but when I pressed the power button, the TV gave off a loud buzz as the screen slowly began to illuminate. I inserted the tape that was titled Family Vacation 1 into the TV as the screen continued to warm up, but the tape was halfway through the film and needed to be rewound. I got distracted and was content with watching where the tape was at. On the screen was a clearly dated timeline which seemed to take place in a small town. It was mainly just scenes of people walking around. After a few frames in, the cameraman seemed to focus on a family walking around what I assumed was Gavin County at the time, as they went about their normal day of vacation. It didn't strike me odd at first, as the scenes depicted a happy family eating in a restaurant and walking through town. However, all of these seemed to be at a distance. It wasn't until the family got into a red station wagon and drove away that I realized that whoever was filming wasn't with them. The scene cut quickly, and now the grainy TV was showing me a wooden landscape as the person filming was driving now. This only lasted for a few seconds before it quickly changed again. Now it showed a first-person perspective of someone walking in the woods, but they didn't seem to be on any type of trail. I wasn't sure at this point if these images were connected in any way. They just seemed random. That was until the last scene of the tape finally showed a cabin a good ways off, one much more dated and older than this one. However, I noticed something that made me uncomfortable. Parked out front of the cabin was a bright red station wagon. One I assumed was the same one the family had gotten into earlier. The tape ended and a black screen filled the TV before automatically rewinding itself. I put in a second tape that was only titled with a date. This one had been rewind unlike the first. This one took place in a city. It was nighttime. Skyscrapers could be seen illuminated, and a handful of pedestrians went about their own way. The scenes in this video didn't last very long, as they only lasted for a few seconds, most of which were just empty buildings or parking garages. Some scenes had either a person or two, but it was clear that they didn't know they were being filmed. This tape only seemed to last no longer than 5 minutes, but that's all it was. Just eerie scenes of people unaware they were being watched in empty locations. I grabbed a third tape, this one titled My First Friend. I inserted the tape and an image of an old house appeared on the screen. The house seemed run down, sitting out in an unkempt field of some kind. It was bright out. Again, the perspective was first person. So far in all of these tapes, I didn't get to see who was filming. This tape was one continuous shot. The person slowly approached the home, which was clear that it was abandoned. The front door had been boarded up. The scene slowly showed us walking around the house, filming in windows and peering inside. We turn the corner to come into the backyard and see that the back door is wide open. The person filming slowly approaches, and we can see on the brick steps a dark stain leading through the doorway. I began to get uneasy. We see the camera get close to the stain, but we are not able to make anything out of it. It then goes back to the first person and we are led inside. Despite the home being abandoned, there is still furniture and appliances inside. However, it is completely destroyed and clear that someone or some type of animal had once made this their home. Trash and leaves were scattered about the home. The stain could still be seen in some shots and crying began to be heard from inside. The cameraman finally follows the stain, which leads to an open doorway. He pauses as the cries get louder. He then peers inside the doorway to see a set of stairs leading down into a dark basement. He takes a single step before the scene abruptly ends. What the hell were these tapes? I ejected the tape and set it with all the others. I made sure to lay them all out so I could see all of their labels. I saw a tape that was titled Family Vacation 2, which I assumed to be a continuation of the first tape. I hesitated. I wasn't sure what I was about to watch. My mind raced as I could only assume the worst. I found myself becoming more and more uneasy, but I inserted the tape anyway. The scene started with a morbid image of a dead deer on the side of the road. Its body was bloated and clearly it had been impacted by a vehicle moving at high speeds. A stick could be seen briefly, poking at its dead body before the scene changed. It was more driving, but it was dark out. I could barely make out the silhouette of trees in the dim headlight of the cameraman's car. He pulled over on the side of the road and the scene ended. The screen went black, but I could hear sounds of something being dragged through the woods. This was the first time I heard the cameraman speak. He swore softly as he grunted while doing something laborious off-screen. A light could be seen as the scene changed. We were outside of a cabin from earlier, but not terribly far away. The light inside reveals the family from earlier, but enjoying their evening, oblivious that this person was filming outside. They seemed to be laughing or talking as we sat quietly in the darkness. This went on for a while as we just sat still and watched. Finally, the lights from inside go off and the dragging sound continues. We hear something being dragged onto what sounded like wooden boards before the scene changes abruptly. It's morning time and we see the front of the cabin. We are behind the red station wagon and see the dead deer from earlier on the porch laying in front of the door before the tape ends. It had seemed that each tape I put in, it got more and more disturbing, more unsettling. I grabbed another tape, but I could only imagine the worst. It was titled Dinner with Friend. This tape was at the end of the recording, so I had to rewind to the beginning. This took a few moments as the screen was blue, slowly blinking, rewind, as a whirring sound could be heard within. I was fixated on the screen, completely obsessed with this stash of nostalgic morbid tapes. The screen immediately displayed an image of a woman gagged and bloodied. She was staring directly in front of the camera, sobbing. She was in some kind of dark room with a very dull flashlight shined right on her face. "Oh my gosh," I whispered, putting my hand over my mouth. The camera slowly steps away, revealing her leg was chained to a concrete wall. "I want you to meet my friend," a soft masculine voice said from behind the camera. "Maybe we can all be friends?" The camera then turned and pointed to the other side of the room, revealing a large unfinished basement, but one you wouldn't find in a house, more like some kind of abandoned building. Several concrete pillars stood, and the man shined his light in between as if he was expecting something to come out of the darkness. You couldn't see the other end of the basement, but I was beginning to fear that the cameraman was the least of this poor woman's problems. You could hear the chain behind the cameraman move slightly, the woman's soft sobs continuing. "Richard," the man cooed, as if trying to coax out a pet from underneath a couch gently. The man began to chuckle. I don't know if that's his real name, but I like to think that's what he'd like to be called. He doesn't like to talk. The light continued to scan in the dark before resting on a pale figure that could be seen briefly poking its head out from behind the pillar. The figure was at a distance and the viewer was not able to get a good look, plus camera quality was incredibly poor. Just pixels of what I assumed to be something terrible. The woman, despite being gagged, began to scream terrified, muffled cries. She clearly didn't like what she saw. The man began to backpedal, clearly worried. "There he is," he whispered. "There's Richard. You get to meet him." The woman continued to scream while tried to follow the cameraman, who was clearly distancing himself before the chain had reached its end. The man filming continued to back up. leaving the woman in between himself and the pale figure lurking in the darkness. The frame then held still as the woman pulled on the chain frantically. The beam of the flashlight would occasionally shine on her, and then behind her as I expected to see something come from the darkness. To my absolute horror, I saw why the woman was so frantic. Slowly approaching from the darkness appeared to be something tall. It was hard to make out details at first since the lens was not focused on him. I could tell by the pale outline that whatever this thing was not wearing any clothes, and it most certainly wasn't human. The creature slowly came into view, revealing a horrifying face. Skin pulled tight over sharp and ragged bones. Eyes sunk deep into its head, and teeth seemed to spill out of its mouth as it appeared to be smiling. Long arms reached forwards, grabbing hold of the chain with clawed hands, and began to slowly pull the woman towards him. The woman tried to pull back, but it was useless. SHHHH, the man hushed. Don't scare him. It will only make it worse. This only made the woman panic more. The woman slowly got pulled away, and I hoped to God that the tape would end like the others, but it didn't. The creature grabbed hold of the woman's arm and pulled it effortlessly off of her body. Blood spewed violently as the creature dropped her and began to take large bites of the removed limb, but it then did something that shocked me. Something even more than this horrible nightmare that came to life before me. It then held out the limb to the woman as she flailed on the ground in pain and stared at her. It extended its hand towards her face and sliced off the gag and held her flesh towards her face. "Eat it," the man whispered. "He wants to share with you." The cameraman then slowly inched forward as he tried to get a good shot of what was happening when the scene ended. I tried to mentally digest what I just saw. Couldn't believe it. I had easily just witnessed the worst thing I had ever seen. Why the hell were these tapes here, and who made them? I got up and removed myself from the tapes and went downstairs. I had to tell my parents. I had to tell them what I found and turn these tapes into the police. Eric had made his way over to the kitchen and was eating a snack, his Switch charging next to him. "Where's Mom and Dad?" I asked, somewhat on edge. He glanced in my direction but didn't look at me. "Good question. Still on that hike, I guess." I checked the time. I had easily just watched an hour of who knows what. There's no way that they were still on that trail. Maybe they found another trail or went into town without telling us, I thought. I checked outside and the SUV was still parked out front. I then remembered the hatch. I just prayed that they didn't do anything stupid, that they had enough common sense to leave the mysterious hatch alone, but things weren't adding up. I waited for them for another hour, but they never showed up. It was now late in the afternoon. It was going to get dark soon. I took the keys to the SUV and made my way over to the front door. "Eric, you should probably come with me. I'm going to head into town and, get ice cream. You want to come?" I had to lie. I knew if I told him the truth, he wouldn't believe me or just wouldn't listen. "Ice cream? Yeah. But shouldn't we wait for Mom and Dad?" I paused. No. You wouldn't let us go if they knew." He had a smile on his face and I knew he was in. We went outside and got into the SUV and took off back into town. Took us longer than I remembered, but we rolled in around 4 p.m. To my surprise, despite finally having cellular data again, the town didn't have a police station. I called 911 and got an operator on the line, but when she asked me for the address, I completely blanked. The address. There's no address, it's just some cabin off the road heading into Gavin County, I said. The woman on the other line wasn't helpful. "Well, what's the emergency you would like to report?" A slight hint of sass in her voice. "My parents have been missing all morning. I don't know what to do." The woman paused before responding. "Well, let me see what I can do." I kept the woman on the line and we drove back to the cabin, still on hold as we waited for a response. Eric was upset about the ice cream, but I told him I'll make it up to him. I parked outside of the cabin and told him to wait here and talk to the operator if she ever got back on the line. I knew what I had to do. I had to look for them myself. I went into the cabin and found a large steak knife in the kitchen and a flashlight under the sink. For good measure, I went back upstairs and grabbed the key and put it in my pocket. I went out the back door of the cabin and headed on the trail that led deep into the woods. The trail was less pleasant than earlier, my mind still swarming with thought of what I had witnessed on that old TV. I just hoped that my parents gotten lost or something incredibly harmless happened, but it was so unlike them to just run off like this. I approached the end of the trail and peered down to the structure where the hatch was. I walked down slowly, unsure of what I was about to do. To my surprise, as I walked closer, I saw that the hatch from earlier was no longer open but had been closed. The hatch had a similar lock on it like the one the closet had inside. I felt around and retrieved the key from my pocket. The long, gross trinket still attached. I inserted the key and twisted. The lock gave much more resistance this time, but eventually clicked open. I lifted the heavy hatch, which required most of my strength, and peered inside. Below was an old ladder that descended about 15 feet or so. At the bottom, I could see a concrete floor that had leaves and dirt scattered about. "Mom, Dad," I called. No answer. I shined my light down. I guided the flashlight in hopes of seeing anything to better explain what this place was, but nothing. "This is so stupid," I whispered as I lowered myself down the hatch and onto the ladder. Once at the bottom of the ladder, a smell of mold mixed with something foul and offensive struck my nose. It was overwhelming. It took me a moment to catch my breath and focus at the task at hand. Once at the bottom of the ladder, I saw that I was now in a much bigger room than what I initially thought I was going to be in. Cement floors and walls extended in the other direction, making me unsure of what lurked beyond in the dark. I shuffled slowly in, stepping further and further away from the light that came in from the open hatch. My heart was already racing when I heard a sound that made me regret everything. The sounds of tearing and breaking of bones could be heard not too far off into the darkness. I stopped and turned off my light, in fear that I just made myself known to whatever was down here. Before I could turn, a hand grabbed my mouth and pulled me away. I swung the knife hard behind me in the direction of the hand, but I missed. I tried to scream, but the hand muffled my mouth. I got ready to stab when I heard the whisper of a familiar voice. "Kay, you have to be quiet," my mom said, in a hushed and worried tone. She slowly released me and I calmed down. I felt a mixture of emotions, but aside from the overwhelming dread, I was relieved. I had found my mother and she was still alive. My mind was now putting together what was going on slowly when she spoke. "We need to leave. We aren't alone down here." My blood ran cold. "Where's Dad?" I asked frantically. My mother paused. "Something took him. It took him into the darkness a while ago, and it has been making that sound for a while now. I don't think he is coming back, sweetie." I had so many questions. I was so confused. Why were they even down here? What took him? My mother got up and held my hand. "Thanks for opening the hatch," she whispered. By this time, the light outside had gone. We needed the flashlight to find the ladder. I turned on the light and shined it behind us when my mom whispered, "Wait," panicked. I turned the light off, unsure of what to do. The ominous sounds from the darkness had stopped. A brief moment of silence hung in the odorous air. Whatever was down here with us was trying to listen, trying to locate us. I felt myself bolting backwards as my mother began to pull me to the ladder. Cries erupted behind us, sending waves of terror through my body. We didn't have to go far, but we both had to climb, and quickly. My mother went first but quickly went up, and I followed impatiently. I could hear it coming for us. My mother cleared the ladder and reached down to pull me up. "Oh my gosh!" she cried as she could see it behind me. I climbed like my life depended on it. Mom reached down and lifted me up. I grabbed the hatch and slammed it down, but something obstructed it. I felt resistance pushing against it as I pushed down hard on the heavy hatch. A pale hand clawed at us, trying to grab hold of us to drag us down. My mother and I put all our weight on the heavy metal, knowing if we failed we were both dead. By some miracle, the hand retracted back into the darkness and we closed the hatch while locking it. We sat on top of it as we caught our breath with tears in our eyes. We could hear muffled screams beneath as whatever that thing was now locked away. It was nighttime now. Our long walk back to the cabin was one of sadness and relief.